Chapter 1057. The final disease detection was the most worrying step for Dean. He needed to draw blood. His blood was mixed with origami factor and several magic mark genes. He didn't know if it would be detected. He prepared for the worst. If he was exposed, he would directly enter the city and lurk. Even if they checked, with the countless residents in the city as a cover, he believed that his means were enough to hide. The round-faced girl sent Dean to the disease detection isolation room and closed the door. Inside, there were 7 or 8 people wearing white coats and masks, covering their whole heads. Dean was arranged to wait behind João de Baio. Physical characteristics were checked, blood tests, colonoscopy, X-ray scanning, and so on. In addition, there were several tests that were not available in the physical examination specifications of the old era, such as saliva testing, dandruff collection, and blood drops into a small test tube. There was a worm in the test tube. Dean saw João de Baio's blood fall into the test tube. The young centipede-like worm was soaked in it. In the blink of an eye, the blood in the test tube was reduced by a few milliliters. At this time, someone took out the worm with a pair of tweezers and extracted its blood for testing. Bloodworm? Duddian asked. The male doctor who helped Dean took a look and nodded, yes. He responded to Dean's words and no longer said anything. He didn't explain. Obviously, he felt that Dean and the other mecha operators had come to test many times and naturally knew what the bloodworm was. Dean looked at the worm and thought, the bloodworm that Su Ming mentioned refers to this thing. He said that it is a special kind of worm found in the body of a monster. It belongs to a kind of parasite. Because of its special body structure, it is used as a detection tool in the border defense. The bloodworm, like demon blood. The so-called demon blood did not refer to the blood of magic mark warriors, but the blood contaminated by germs and parasites, such as the blood of various monsters. These monsters lived outside the giant wall. There were countless parasites and germs in their bodies. Any one of them was enough to infect people. Even the physically strong pioneers were not willing to drink the blood of monsters to quench their thirst. But to the bloodlust worms, the blood of monsters was a delicious meal. The various parasites and germs in the blood were their desserts, and they ate them as food. If it was pure blood, they would not be interested. Looks like João de Baio's body condition isn't very good. Dean saw a female doctor testing the blood of the worm. The worm would differentiate the germs and parasites in the blood and slowly digest them, or would be excreted into feces. From this, one could know which germs were hidden in the blood. There were some germs that couldn't be detected with the equipment here, but if they were divided by the bloodworm, they could be found. Therefore, this was the second line of defense for blood testing. Soon, it was Dean's turn. I hope my guess is right. Duddian looked at the male doctor who was drawing his blood. If the matter was exposed, he would be the first to be beheaded. The male doctor lowered his head and dripped his blood into the test tube. He had no idea that there was a pair of demonic eyes staring at him coldly above his head, and that his life could be harvested at any moment. When the blood fell to the bottom of the test tube, the worm was soaked in the blood and extended its tentacles to suck the blood. But the next moment, the worm seemed to be frightened. It suddenly retracted its hair-like tentacles. Its body violently twisted. From the front of its body, 2 big pincers drilled out of the blood and crawled out of the test tube. It seemed to want to escape from the straw. Dean could see the panic of the worm. But in the eyes of the male doctor, the worm was as big as a mung bean. As for the tentacles, they were even less visible. He saw that the worm wanted to crawl out of the test tube and didn't want to stay inside. Little worm wants to escape. The male doctor took out a pair of forceps and clamped the worm. Then he took the blood test. It didn't suck my blood. Sure enough, it is afraid of the origami factor in my blood. Although the little thing doesn't have much wisdom, but its instinct for danger is still there. But also shows that the origami factor is too terrible. If it sucks my blood, it will definitely be swallowed. Dean thought. Soon, the male doctor took out the test report of the worm. He glanced at it and nodded. Healthy. Dean nodded slightly. The worm had been raised by them. There were no germs in its body, and it didn't suck his blood. Naturally, the result was normal. 10 minutes later, Dean and João de Baio took their respective medical reports and left the quarantine center. I have a little cold. Fortunately, I didn't get infected with anything from the demon race. Zhao Debao patted his chest and said with lingering fear, "When I saw the doctor frown, I thought there was a big problem with me." Dean glanced at his medical report. Except for the cardiopulmonary function test, which showed that he was not very healthy and needed to exercise, everything else was qualified. It could be said that he had successfully sneaked in for the time being. However, his medical report would be entered into the computer and compared with Su Ming's medical report. At that time, it would be found that their blood types were not the same. Their other physical conditions were also quite different. If they wanted to identify them, they would find out that they were not the same person. However, Su Ming said that the medical reports of the mecha operators were A-level files. Only specialized managers were qualified to look at them. Under normal circumstances, they wouldn't look so carefully. After all, there were so many mecha operators who would remember the data of their previous physical reports. As long as they were qualified, everything would be fine. In any case, there is still the danger of being reported. I must find a new identity as soon as possible. First, I have to get familiar with this place as soon as possible. Dean thought in his heart. "Are you okay?" Zhao Debao saw that Dean didn't answer, so he touched his shoulder with his arm. "Is there something wrong with your body? If there are any suspicious speculations, you have to go to the hospital in time. The physical examination here may not be able to detect everything." Previously, there was an unlucky guy. A strange insect flew into the mecha's exhaust port and drilled into his neck. He said that his neck was bitten by a mosquito, but the mecha was so clean. How could there be a mosquito? Later, the physical examination didn't find anything. Not long after, he felt uncomfortable. He went to the hospital for a checkup. It was found that he was sick. Moreover, it was incurable. Finally, he had to be sent to the crematorium to be destroyed. I heard that at that time, his body was full of parasite eggs. His saliva was filled with white eggs. It was very disgusting. Dean's heart shivered. If the physical examination here can't detect anything, then there is no hope in other places. That's not necessarily true. Although the inspection here is strict and the equipment is advanced, but if you really feel that there's a problem, you can go to the Saint Research Institute to check. It's just that the cost is relatively high. Zhao Debao said. That's why I said there is no hope. Dean secretly noted in his heart. At the same time, he pointed to himself with a relaxed face. Did you forget that I need money? Zhao Debao's face slightly changed. Do you really feel uncomfortable? No. Didn't you see my medical report? I'm healthier than you. I haven't left the mecha, nor have I been bitten by a mosquito. It's impossible for insects to fly into the mecha and parasitize me. Dean shrugged. Zhao Debao stared into his eyes. You are not lying to me? I'm a dog if I lie to you. Dean also looked at him seriously. He was very serious. He was afraid that Su Ming's close friend would secretly find him some advanced medical equipment to help him check. Zhao Debao was relieved. That's good. In any case, life is the most important. Anyway, we can earn money in the future. It's not a big deal to do a few more missions. Dean nodded. At this time, the two came to a small helicopter. The person on the helicopter saw the two dressed up and waved. It's just enough for 3 people. Let's go. The middle-aged man on the helicopter was also a mecha operator. He had finished the medical examination in front of Dean and Zhao Debao. Dean and Zhao Debao sat on the helicopter. The helicopter started and slowly lifted off. Zhao Debao didn't talk about private matters with Dean since they were outsiders. Instead, he talked to the man about the mission. Inevitably, he cursed a few vulgar words about the demon bastards. Dean looked at the scenery outside the helicopter. It was very empty and sparsely populated. Because it was near the edge of the city, once the war broke out, the army would be hoarded here. It was not suitable to be developed into a bustling neighborhood. They had to take a plane for more than half an hour to go back to the military headquarters. It was hundreds of miles away. Beep! Suddenly, a slight vibration sounded from his wrist. Dean was startled. He looked down at his watch. There was a message popping up on it. Is it your sister? Zhao Debao stopped talking with the middle-aged man and suddenly looked over. Dean saw that there was no name displayed on the communication device. It was not in the address book. He couldn't help but frown. He picked up the call and heard a male voice. "Is it Mr. Su Ming? Your sister is in the operating room. She is ready for the operation. Please be sure to be there." Operating room? Dean's pupils shrank. He was about to ask which hospital, but suddenly thought of something. He changed his words. "I'll go right away. You go ahead with the operation. Be sure to use the best doctors." Then he took the initiative to hang up the communication. Zhao Debao's face changed. "Your sister's going to have an operation?" Dean was so anxious that his legs kept shaking. He suddenly thought of something and shouted, "Oh no, I forgot to ask which hospital it is." Chapter 1058. Can I trouble you to fly faster? Dean asked the pilot in front of him. The pilot also heard the situation and nodded. "We will arrive soon. Don't worry." "Thank you," Dean said gratefully. He rubbed his palms and looked impatient, but in his heart he was thinking. He had interrogated Su Ming about a lot of things, but it was inevitable that he would be negligent. His sister's illness was the biggest oversight at present. He must be careful not to expose himself. Otherwise, not only would his hands be stained with blood, but he would also add trouble to himself. Helicopters flew past one vast apron after another. Some aprons had fighter aircrafts parked on them, while others had rows of troll mechas. Many people were driving around in repair vehicles, repairing and inspecting these mechas. Suddenly, at the end of the apron, in front of a lush forest, stood a simple and unadorned statue. It was more than 200 or 300 meters high. It was a man with a Western face. He had a handsome and extraordinary appearance, wearing a crown. One of his hands was holding a holy fire, and the other hand was holding a book. His feet were wrapped in chains. The Statue of Liberty? Dean saw the familiar posture and was stunned. He had interrogated Su Ming about the beliefs of the people here, and Su Ming had given him the answer of the god of science and technology. Could it be that this was the god of science and technology? But this shape was completely copied from the Statue of Liberty of the United States. But this person also had a European face. Dean had a messy feeling. In his mind, he couldn't help but think of the early days of the disaster. A survivor led the rest of the people to survive, reproduce, gain the right to rule, and then cast himself such a statue of the Statue of Liberty. How boring this person is. Dean's mouth slightly twitched. He noticed that Zhao Debao and another middle-aged man had a solemn look on their faces. They were in awe. Their heads were also consciously bowing down. The helicopter circled around the statue, but didn't directly fly over its head. It could be seen that this statue was of extraordinary significance. Dean wanted to ask and confirm the identity of the statue, but he didn't know how to open his mouth. He sighed. "Every time I see it, I think it's too handsome. It's simply impeccable." Zhao Debao patted his shoulder and smiled. Of course, the god of science and technology is a god with both wisdom and beauty. Compared to those origami monsters of the Nephilim race, this is a true god. Those origami are all paralyzed in the lower half of their bodies. They are obviously demons, but these Nephilim race still worshipped him as a god. As expected, demons believe in demons, while humans believe in gods. Indeed, the god of science and technology. Dudian thought in his heart. He remembered that the lower body of the origami was a hideous monster. He couldn't help but be dumbfounded. It was indeed possible. It was impossible for God to exist. The origami was either an alien race or a hybrid of the first generation of warriors and monsters. However, he had heard that the origami existed in the early days of the war between humans and the insects. The helicopter flew over the lush forest. After a long time, he saw steel buildings standing at the end of the forest. They were like dense, silvery bamboo shoots inserted into the ground. In addition, Dean saw that there were tracks around the steel buildings. It was like a playground slide. He was puzzled when he saw a maglev train coming from the distance. It stopped next to one of the steel buildings. Then he saw the maglev train open. A lot of people came out of the train and went into the steel building. The level of technology is so high. Dean was shocked by the image of the future city. He didn't expect that the people's fantasy would come true. Even a maglev train could gallop in the air. Although it was still far from the real maglev train as it needed to rely on the tracks, but it was already a great progress. If the technology of the old era hasn't been cut off, then after more than 300 years of development, it is indeed possible to reach such a level, or even far beyond. Dean's eyes flashed. He felt the blood in his body boiling. The technology here was much higher than what he had imagined. No wonder they could create a huge war machine like the Troll Mecha. After a moment, the helicopter stopped on the roof of a steel building. Dudien and Zhao Debeo quickly got off the helicopter. Dudien deliberately panicked when he got off the helicopter. He tripped and fell down. He was in a very embarrassing state. Zhao Debeo was shocked and quickly came forward to support him. "Are you okay? It doesn't matter. Take me to Anhai Hospital." Dean clenched his teeth and pretended to be in pain. Zhao Debeo saw that his face was red, but he didn't try to persuade him. He immediately helped him to walk quickly. Dean let Zhao Debeo lead the way. They took the elevator from the side of the steel building. It was inconvenient for him to move, so Zhao Debeo pressed the button and went directly to the maglev elevator floor. After getting out of the elevator, Zhao Debeo took Dudien to an extension of the exhibition stand and waited for him. A moment later, a whistling sound came from a fast place. 4 or 5 seconds after the sound was transmitted, a silver-white maglev train rushed along the track and stopped right next to the booth. 2 doors opened. A lot of people came out of one compartment, while the other compartment was for people to enter. Zhao Debeo helped Dean into the compartment and saw that there were a lot of empty seats in the compartment. Zhao Debeo helped Dean to sit on the chair and put on the seatbelt. Seeing that Dean's hands and feet were inconvenient, he also helped him put on the seatbelt. "Thank you," Dean whispered. Zhao Debeo laughed. "Don't worry, we'll be there soon." Then he pointed his watch at the lens in the middle of the seatbelt. Dean noticed that there were a lot of mecha like them in the carriage. After fastening the seatbelt, they did the same action. He immediately raised his hand and scanned the seatbelt with his watch. It didn't take long for the maglev train to start. In just a few seconds, it accelerated to a few hundred miles. The scenery outside the window instantly became gorgeous. When the track curved, the maglev train also curved and flipped up and down. It was like riding a roller coaster in an amusement park. But the gravity in the carriage was constant. When the train flipped, the people in the carriage didn't feel that they were flipped unless they saw the scenery outside the window. The maglev train passed in front of a steel building, stopped, and started again. Half an hour later, they came to a steel building. Zhao Debeo pressed the middle button of the seatbelt on his chest and got off with Dean. After arriving at the steel building, they took the elevator down to the bottom of the building. There was a subway track here. These buildings are actually parking stations. There are lounges and entertainment venues on each floor. It's too luxurious. Dean glanced at the whole building with his X-ray vision when Zhao Debeo was not paying attention. He couldn't help but be amazed. He felt as if he had come to the future world of technology. Chapter 1059. Under the leadership of Zhao Debeo, Dean entered the hinterland of the modern, to be precise, futuristic metropolis. The moment the train came out of the ground, Dean had a feeling that he was riding a time machine to return to the old era. The familiar three-dimensional box buildings, traffic lights, roads, everything was projecting the shadow of the old era. Is this the last shelter of the old era survivors? Dean looked at it in a daze. Suddenly, there was a kind of inexplicable gratification and sadness. His father gave him the super chip, but he inexplicably appeared in a giant wall of the Shenluo Empire, where he experienced hardships. If this was the place where he woke up at the beginning, would he have lived a happy life in the past 10 years? He thought for a while, but soon shook his head. Even if he woke up here, his life would be 100 times more comfortable. I will never meet her in this life. What's the point of everything? After a while, Zhao Debeo brought Dean to a magnificent hospital. The reason why it was magnificent was that the hospital was like a university. In front of the hospital stood a 10-meter stone tablet of the god of science and technology. There are gardens, grasslands, pools, and beautiful birdwoods. The main entrance of the hospital was extraordinary. The pedestrians were in a hurry, but they were orderly. Only a faint smell of medicine floated out from the inside, which made Dean frown slightly. Zhao Debeo rushed into the hospital, took the elevator, and came to the front desk on the 24th floor. "We are Su Mingzhu's family members. Which operating room is she in? Please show me your ID." The nurse at the front desk said expressionlessly. Dean handed over his wristwatch. This wristwatch was not only a communicator, but also recorded a lot of information related to him. It was equivalent to an identity card. The nurse at the front desk scanned the wristwatch with an instrument, and Dean's identity information popped up on the computer. She glanced at it, and her face suddenly changed color. She looked at Dean in surprise and quickly said, "It turns out to be Mr. Mecca. Hello, your sister Su Mingzhu is in room C8. Please come with me." After that, she came out from the front desk and personally led the way for Dean. Dean asked as he walked, "Has my sister's operation started?" The nurse shook her head. "Not yet. The family hasn't arrived yet, and the money hasn't arrived yet. So she is temporarily recovering." Dean was furious. "Isn't the situation critical? Why don't you perform the operation first?" "This is the rule. Please forgive me," the nurse said while trembling with fear. Dean was full of anger. He followed him to room C8, opened the door, and saw that there were 4 beds in this ward. There were metal covers around the beds, isolating the beds. It was quite high-end, but Dean turned a blind eye to it and said angrily, "Why not a separate ward?" "Sir, your sister's medical expenses have not been paid, so—" The nurse was embarrassed, but her good impression of Dean was gone. She secretly despised him. Pretending to be angry, he was obviously a mecha operator, but he did not pay his sister's medical expenses, and he still has the face to blame me. Dean clenched his fists. Under the guidance of the nurse, they came to a bed covered with a white metal cover. He saw the nurse press the metal cover. Inside was a pale girl wearing a hospital gown, about 17 or 18 years old. "Brother?" When the girl saw the face outside the metal cover, she couldn't help but be startled. Then, she exclaimed in pleasant surprise, "You're here." Dean's heart was slightly touched. He suddenly thought of his sister. He took a deep breath and stepped forward to hold her hand. "Don't worry, I'm here. I'll definitely cure your lung cancer." When he entered the ward, he used his X-ray vision to scan the situation in the room when the nurse and Zhao Debeo were not paying attention. The other 3 beds were occupied by 2 old men and a middle-aged woman. Only this girl matched his sister's age, so he confirmed her identity and took the opportunity to scan her body. At a glance, he could see that Su Ming's sister had lung cancer. The area where the cancer cells had spread was not small, and there were traces of resection. Obviously, she had an operation before, but the cancer cells had not been eradicated. Generally speaking, the probability of women getting lung cancer was very low. After all, women did not like smoking as much as men, let alone such a young girl. Although Dean was puzzled, he soon thought that it might be because of the environment. He needed to know more about it. Hearing his words, Su Mingzhu bit her lips slightly and whispered, "Brother, I've caused you trouble again." Dean rubbed her head. "Fool, this is no trouble. I've even killed demons. How can I not overcome this little disease in your body?" Su Mingzhu smiled. "I know, brother. Don't worry. This time the situation is not that bad. I can still be saved." Dean could not help but smile, but he did not continue to talk with her. He turned to the nurse and said, "How much is the operation fee?" "I don't know the specific amount, but if your sister has lung cancer, the operation fee is generally between 200,000 to 400,000 federal coins." The nurse quickly said. Dean frowned and his face slightly sank. "Do the operation first. I'll help you get the money." At this time, Zhao Debeo said, "You just paid off your debt. You can pay me back when you get your salary next month." Dean looked at him. He knew that Zhao Debeo said this not because he wanted him to pay back the money, but because he was afraid of hurting his self-esteem. Although Su Ming was dead, he still had a good brother. However, he felt that it was not necessary. Even if Zhao Debeo did not give him face, he would kneel and beg for money to treat his sister. In the face of life and death, how much was face worth? Thank you. Dean patted him on the shoulder. In his heart, he secretly thought that Su Ming was most likely a guy who cared about face. Otherwise, he would not let his brother care about face so much. Seeing that he agreed, Zhao Debao was relieved and immediately ordered the nurse. Soon, the doctor came and sent Su Mingzhu to the operating room. Dean and Zhao Debao waited outside. Dean secretly calculated in his heart. He did not expect Su Ming to still be in debt. No wonder a mecha operator had no money to treat his sister's illness. But speaking of which, mecha operators were considered to be a profession of guarding the border. How could his relatives not get free medical treatment? He felt that it was necessary to go back to the army to familiarize himself with the treatment and benefits of mecha operators. By the way, he could understand the social structure here through the military. Not long after, Su Mingzhu was sent out. Dean glanced at her with his X-ray vision and found that the cancer cells in her chest and lungs had been removed. His heart was relieved. Although the fees here were high, the medical level was much better than in the old era. Stay in the hospital and recuperate. I have to go back to report. I can't accompany you anymore. I'll see you when things are over. Dean said goodbye to his sister. Su Mingzhu was very weak. She barely said a few words and fell asleep. After walking out of the hospital, Dean was secretly relieved. He knew that the danger had finally passed. Let's go back, Dean said to Zhao Debao. Zhao Debao nodded. He helped the injured Didion to ride the railway in the city and went back and forth. When it was dark, the two returned to the military headquarters. The military headquarters was in a remote suburb outside the city. It was very secretive. There were sentries hidden within 100 miles of the military area. There should be a lot of technology monitoring this place. When the two entered the military base, they needed to enter the iris and scan their identity. Dean let Zhao Debao go first. After the scan, he quickly took out Su Ming's eyeball and swayed it over the iris. The scan passed. Su Ming's eyeball was completely frozen at the moment. It was not rotten. Dean used the heat control ability of the Sun Beast Magic Mark to lower the temperature around the eyeball. He froze it out of thin air. The underground base was like the intestine of an insect machine. There were intricate passageways and checkpoints. Many of the checkpoints on the periphery needed to be scanned. Dean was worried that there were surveillance cameras in the passageways. Before the scan, he secretly retracted one of his eyeballs into the soft tissue of the skull. Then he pressed Su Ming's eyeball into his eye socket. It felt very cold and uncomfortable, but it was still within the range of his pain tolerance. Chapter 1060. Sergeant Su Ming, Commander Li is looking for you. Dean and Zhao Debao returned to the reporting hall of the base. After they had finished their registration, a young man with a bear-like physique found Dean and asked him to see Commander Li. It's okay. Zhao Debao winked at Dean and patted his shoulder. Dean nodded and followed the young man through the corridor. A checkpoint twisted open like a fan, and inside was a spacious office. Commander Li, Sergeant Su Ming is here. The young man put his hand on his chest and bowed. In front of the office sat a middle-aged man with a dignified face. His beard extended from his sideburns to his chin, shaping his face into a deep and masculine face. It was an Asian face. He stared at the monitor on the desk and said without raising his head, "Got it. You can leave now." The young man retreated, leaving Dean alone. "Commander." Dean used the same gesture to salute. The middle-aged man slowly raised his eyes, and his eyes were indifferent. "Tell me about Kai Zhongkong and Sun Yong." Dean took a deep breath and repeated the words he had said to Zhao Debao. This time, it was more detailed, including how to pursue and how to escape. The abyss that split the black lizard. Commander Li's finger lightly tapped on the table. After a long time, he suddenly looked at Dean, and his eyes were sharp. "So in the end, you became a deserter?" Dean quickly said, "Leader, I didn't escape because I was afraid. I wanted to bring back this information. I think that on the battlefield, you can't be called a warrior. You can play your value and be called a warrior." Commander Li slightly raised his eyebrows and snorted. "Glib tongue. As a soldier, you didn't respond properly to an accident. You didn't take responsibility after the accident. If everyone was like you and talked about escaping, how could we fight this war? Huh? Dean was trembling. He didn't dare to say anything and lowered his head. His heart was relieved. I know your situation. Your father's company went bankrupt and owes a huge debt. You need to repay it, so you're in urgent need of money. But the battlefield is not a child's play. Don't be blinded by money. This time, because of your negligence, 2 comrades died. How will you face their families? Commander Lee looked at him coldly. Please punish me. Dean buried his head lower. The sharpness in Regiment Commander Lee's eyes gradually disappeared. He said indifferently, It's good that you know your mistake. Remember, don't tell anyone about this. There are too many things involved. Be careful not to attract unnecessary trouble. Dean's eyes flashed, and he nodded. Thank you for reminding me. Remind me? I'm smart. Regiment Commander Lee thought to himself. He waved his hand indifferently. Go down. I have high hopes for you, but that doesn't mean I can tolerate you making mistakes again and again. You can't do it twice. Dean respectfully bowed his head and retreated. Smelly brat. He must be scared out of his wits after this incident. His brain is more flexible than before. Commander Lee looked at Dean's back and thought, It seems that there's a problem with their operation. There must be a traitor within the military or a spy placed in the giant wall. This matter involves a lot of important people. I should not get involved in this muddy water. I should familiarize myself with this place as soon as possible and then leave. Dean thought of Regiment Commander Lee's words and speculated in his heart. He quickly left the place and returned to his dormitory in the barracks. You're back. Are you okay? Zhao de Bayo and Dean lived in the same dormitory. When he saw Dean coming back, he quickly asked. Dean shook his head and looked relieved. I'm fine. I told you about the situation. Regiment Commander Lee just told me not to spread it out. Don't tell anyone about this matter. It will save you trouble. Zhao de Bayo's eyes turned cold. He nodded and said, I know. It's good that you're okay. I want to go back to see my sister. Do you want to go? Dean deliberately invited him. Zhao de Bayo shook his head. I want to go, but we can't go. I know you are worried about your sister. But don't do stupid things and violate the military discipline. When there are holidays in the future, I will go with you to see your sister. Or we can go after the next battle. Dean was silent and a little depressed. He knew that it was not so easy for the mecha operators to enter and leave the barracks. But listening to Zhao de Bayo's words, even though they had just finished the battle, they did not have holidays. It could be seen how strict the control was on them. Next, Dean pretended to be in a bad mood. He lay down on his bed and sorted out his personal belongings. There were a few books. He picked them up and looked at them. 2 were about mecha knowledge. One was a storybook, and the other was a booklet. It recorded the rules and common knowledge of mecha operators. Dean was happy. He pretended to casually pick up the storybook and looked at it. At the same time, he sensed his surroundings. He saw that Zhao de Bayo's attention was gradually shifting away. It seemed that Zhao de Bayo wanted him to be quiet. He slowly put down the storybook in his hand and pretended to be bored to death. Su Ming had obviously read the things written in the booklet. It was a must-read for every mecha operator. He could even memorize it. But for him, these things were very useful. Mecha operators rules. 1-star mecha operator's monthly salary is 100,000 federal coins. During non-war period, 8 hours of mecha training every day. 3 mecha competitions a week. Dean quickly flipped through the booklet. He finished it in a few minutes and casually threw it aside. Then he picked up a book about mecha knowledge and casually flipped through it. His mind was thinking quickly. I didn't expect these mecha operators to have such an easy life. 8 hours of training every day. The physical and mental consumption is huge. The salary is 100,000 federal coins. With Su Ming's salary, it would take him 2.5 months to earn the money for his sister's medical treatment. But he still owes a huge debt. Dean's eyes flashed. He thought of the scene when he entered the city. Not all the people he saw were from the East. There are also a few Western people. The meaning of the word federation was very obvious. This was not an imperial system, and there was not only one race. It seems that this is indeed the place where the survivors gathered after the catastrophe. Whether it is technology or culture, they have been passed down. The humans inside the war god's wall should also be survivors. It's just that the technology there is suppressed. However, I haven't been to the kingdom of God. I don't know if it's the same in the imperial capital where the seven kings live. But looking at the airships and spaceships on the war god's wall, the technology of the empire isn't much worse. But why does the empire suppress the technology inside the giant wall? Is it possible that the technology in some places is suppressed here? Dean pondered, but after thinking about it, he put away these thoughts. He couldn't even deal with his own matters. It was useless to think about these things. Su Ming is a one-star mecha operator. According to the book, mecha operators are divided into 5 levels, from 1 star to 5 stars. A 1-star mecha operator operating a black lizard mecha has combat strength comparable to a lower abyss. But the destructive power of the mecha itself is enough to kill a middle or even upper abyss. But the other hardware doesn't match. It's difficult to hit the enemy even with a laser knife. Its comprehensive combat strength is only lower abyss. A 2-star mecha operator operating a dragon mecha has combat strength comparable to a middle abyss. A 3-star mecha operator operating a heaven punishment mecha has combat strength comparable to a upper abyss. A 4-star mecha operator operating an Athena mecha has combat strength comparable to a Lord of the Abyss, and a 5-star mecha operator operating a Genesis God mecha has combat strength comparable to a king. A 1-star pilot like Su Ming needs to train hard every day. He doesn't have the qualifications to take a leave of absence unless a relative dies. Dean half closed his eyes as he calculated in his mind. But a 3-star pilot can take a leave of absence. A 3-star pilot can operate the Xingtian mecha. They can serve as the captain of the black lizard mecha on the battlefield. They are also called mecha masters. As for a 4-star mecha operator, in addition to the official title of 4-star mecha operator, they are also called the king of mecha. And a 5-star mecha operator is called a legend. Dean sighed in his heart. If it wasn't for the condition of 5-star mecha operator hindering him, he would have been excited after reading this booklet. He would have become a 5-star mecha operator in any case. Then he could get a Genesis God mecha and have combat strength comparable to the king of the empire. However, it wasn't difficult for him to become a 3-star mecha operator. He could easily meet the requirements of brain and body. If he spent more time, it wouldn't be a problem to become a 4-star mecha operator. As for becoming a 5-star mecha pilot, he would be able to complete the test in another 2 months. Although a 5-star mecha pilot would need to reach the level of a grandmaster in terms of military tactics, in addition to piloting, they would also need to have a vast amount of mecha knowledge, as well as many other types of knowledge. However, all of these were things that he could learn. The only thing he couldn't do was for a 5-star mecha pilot would have to surrender all of their loyalty. Chapter 1061. Dean wasn't in a hurry to take the Mecha Master exam. Instead, he flipped through the 2 mecha-related books on Su Ming's bedside. After reading these 2 books, he realized how right he was to be cautious. These 2 books completely subverted the concept of mecha in his mind. Even though he had previously interrogated Su Ming about the operating methods of mecha, he had only been able to understand the basics of operating mecha. His understanding of mecha itself came from the imagination of science fiction stories and movies from the olden era. However, the Federation's mecha wasn't a battle weapon assembled by metal machinery. Its structure was extremely complex, and it was even like a living body. The titanium alloy shell, the complex arteries, and the coolant, recovery fluid, and other substances flowing in the arteries were like the blood of the mecha. In addition, the mecha was like a human. The heart and the brain were the core of the mecha. The brain carried the calculation and intelligent host of the mecha, and the heart was the core of the energy. All the energy needed for the mecha was output from the heart. It's not a simple fuel energy, nor is it nuclear energy or electric energy. This is a brand new energy source. Dean muttered to himself. 300 years had passed. The wise people who survived had developed a brand new energy source. This energy source could make the mecha appear on the scene. It could erupt with terrifying inhuman power. It could also drive thousands or even tens of thousands of tons of spaceships into the sky. If I can get the manufacturing blueprints of these mecha, I can control an army of lions. As long as I have the resources, I can continue to expand. This is much faster than cultivating an abyss. It can help me overthrow the Empire in the fastest speed, control the Empire, and then find her. Dean's eyes were getting brighter and brighter. He couldn't help but be excited. It was too difficult to overthrow the 7 kings of the Empire by himself. However, if a team of Abyss Lions were to descend into the Imperial capital, it would be enough to help him suppress the forces under the 7 great kings. In fact, if he could create a creator god mech, he would have enough power to fight against the 7 great kings. The reason why the Federation and the Empire were in a stalemate for so many years was very complicated. Perhaps the Federation was the same as the Empire. There were enemies at the borders that they had to deal with, or the forces of the Empire had infiltrated each other. But Dean felt that the main reason was that the Federation's attacks were unable to cross the God of War wall. The Empire made use of the geographical advantage of the Battle God wall. It was easy to defend and hard to attack. They only needed to invest half of their forces to defend it. The Federation, on the other hand, might have other reasons, or perhaps it was because they weren't united enough, or because they had too many interests at stake, which prevented them from launching an all-out assault on the Empire. Otherwise, just the giant, demonic divine cannon alone would have been enough to inflict heavy losses on the Empire's border guards. If it wasn't for this 3,000-meter-tall, miracle-like battle god wall, the Empire might have long been annihilated. However, for Dean, he had a way to sneak over the war god's wall. If he could drop a large number of mechas into the Empire's capital, it would be enough to cause the greatest destruction. That giant demon god cannon can probably obliterate even a king, and even pierce through a spaceship in one shot. No matter how strong a king's body is, it can't compare to titanium alloy. However, these kings have strange abilities. If their bodies aren't completely turned to ash, they might be able to survive even if their heart is pierced, just like Crimson Moon. Dudian thought in his heart. The Federation had technological weapons that could deter the kings. If he learned how to make them, then it would be the beginning of his campaign. The next day, Dean, Zhao DeBeo, and other dormitory roommates went out together to the mecha training room in another part of the base. This training room was very spacious. It was a public training room. There was no mecha inside. The training relied on a simulation helmet and a smart computer for training. Different combat fields could be set up. There were plains, deserts, swamps, hills, forests, and other different environments. At the moment, there were 20 to 30 people training in the training room. Dean and Zhao DeBeo picked 2 simulation training machines. They put on helmets, scanned the iris, and logged into the mecha. Dean deliberately took Zhao DeBeo to a remote seat. He waited for Zhao DeBeo's headset to hear the electronic voice registering mecha. He quickly took out 2 frozen eyeballs from his pocket and stuffed them into the eye sockets. The light of the iris scan shone through the helmet. An electronic synthetic female voice came from the headset. Identity scanning. Identity entering. Staff Sergeant Su Ming. Do you want to start the simulation training? Yes, Dean said. At the same time, he quickly dug out the 2 frozen eyeballs and put them into his pocket. Then he took a deep breath and squeezed out his own eyes. At this time, the scene in his line of sight was no longer in the training room. Countless streamers flew over and then entered a row of many mecha. These mecha had strange shapes. Some looked like a human-shaped wild boar with 2 fangs on its head. Some looked like a tiger lying on the ground. Among these mecha, only the black lizard mecha that Dean had seen was not black and white. Su Ming is a soldier. His identity is bound. He can only choose this military black lizard mecha to train. The other mecha are commercial and entertainment mecha developed by the company that manufactured this training system. Dean had already understood the situation in front of him from the booklet. After a brief glance at the other mecha shapes, he chose the only military black lizard mecha to train. After choosing the mecha, he began to choose the scene and difficulty. The difficulty was divided into 6 levels: beginner, intermediate, advanced, difficult, master, and abyss. The Black Lizard Mecha was a 1-star mecha, so these difficulties were also 1-star. When he completed the master difficulty, it meant that his operating level could steadily pass the 2-star mecha pilot assessment. As for the abyss difficulty, it should be the full potential of the Black Lizard Mecha simulated by the AI. If a human operated it, it would be impossible to pass unless it was as perfect as the AI without any mistakes. This was the first time Dean played with a mecha, so he was somewhat curious and looking forward to it. He didn't make things difficult for himself. He first chose a plain environment. When choosing the difficulty, he found that beginner and intermediate were gray. He couldn't choose the lowest difficulty, which meant that Su Ming had already passed the intermediate difficulty and reached the advanced level. Among the 1-star mecha pilots, he was considered an above-average talent. After choosing, the interface in front of him quickly broke and the actual combat scene loaded. After a moment, Dean found himself in a mecha. Looking out from the mecha's rearview mirror, he saw that he was surrounded by a plane. He looked down and saw that all the buttons were the same as in the Black Lizard Mecha. The simulation was very realistic. At this time, the countdown of the battle came from above. Dean looked around and put his hands on the console. With the start of the battle, 8 beams of light appeared around him. When the light dispersed, there were 8 monsters formed by virtual data. Their bodies were huge, and they were actually 8 wolves with a body length of more than 10 meters. These wolves had dark blue fur, agile bodies, mouths full of fangs, dripping saliva, and let out a low growl. Like real monsters, they surrounded the mecha. Soon, the first wolf took the lead and rushed over from behind Dean. Dean's eyes turned cold, and his hands quickly reacted on the console. He lifted the joystick, and the mecha slid sideways, avoiding the wolf's attack. At the same time, he used a super fast hand speed to activate the mecha's laser knife. He lifted the knife and pierced the wolf's abdomen from bottom to top, cutting it into 2. At this time, the other 7 wolves howled and rushed over at the same time. Dean's eyes turned cold, and he used a super fast hand speed to activate the mecha's thruster. For a short moment, he soared up, and the machine gun on his body ejected. Bullets fell like a curtain of rain, bombarding the wolves below into the dust. At the same time, he used a super fast hand speed again. While attacking, he opened the infrared detector and saw the shadows of 7 wolves in the thick fog. He immediately went to kill the wolf at the edge. The laser knife of the mecha was very flexible in his hands. One knife cut the wolf in half, and then he went to kill the other wolves. Soon, he killed 3 of them. At this time, the remaining 4 wolves locked onto him, roaring and rushing over at the same time. Dean turned the joystick in his hands, and his fingers were as fast as a phantom. The mecha's feet suddenly emitted smoke, and the next moment, it suddenly spun in place. The laser knife in his hands was raised horizontally, and the beautiful knife light turned into a circle. The 4 wolves that rushed over were killed at the same time. When the 4 wolves' bodies turned into white light and disappeared, Dean heard the voice saying congratulations on passing. He could not help but be startled, and then he was relieved. He did not expect to pass the high difficulty on his first try. It seemed that after he was completely familiar with it, it would not be long before he could become a 3-star mecha master. He could then take leave from the base and go outside to understand the comprehensive picture of the Federation. When the screen returned to that page, Dean saw a screen full of jubilant pictures, which made his mood better. He then continued to choose the next difficulty. While Dean was immersed in the training of mastering the mecha, in an office of the Federal Mecha Military Archives Management Headquarters, a 27-year-old young man made himself a cup of coffee, yawned, and looked at the computer in front of him that kept flashing with data. His task was to manage the files of all the soldiers of the 3rd District's Border Mecha Military Headquarters. However, although it was said that he was in charge, in fact, these files were managed by the AI and did not need to be manually operated. Therefore, his position was quite idle to the point that he wanted to go to work and play games. Unfortunately, this archives management department blocked all external signals and also cut off internal signals. He could only be in a daze, unable to do anything. Suddenly, a notification popped up on the computer in front of him. Soldier's information is abnormal. Abnormal? The young man was just about to get up and stretch his neck. When he saw this notification, he could not help but be stunned. He immediately opened it, and a page of information popped up, recording all the information of a soldier. Chapter 1062. The battle ended on the afternoon of the 21st. The young man looked at the recent battle time and details of the third region, and then looked at the soldier's information that had been entered into the database. The latest update time was the 21st. The young man was confused. After thinking for a moment, his face suddenly changed. Not good. A demon has sneaked in. He suddenly got up and was ready to report this matter to the military and let the military find the demon spy. However, after his finger opened the contact list on the communicator, the name at the top of the list suddenly made him wake up. He immediately took the lead to click on this name and reported the matter. A demon spy has sneaked into the military? A gentle male voice came from the back of the communicator. After hearing the young man's words, he fell into silence and seemed to be thinking. The young man responded and did not dare to urge. Even though it was through the communicator, his back could not help but slightly bend slightly, and his attitude was humble. After a while, the gentle male voice spoke again. Contact Little Six and let him enter the mecha training system from the background and check this person's mecha training situation. In addition, there is no need to report this matter to the military. Send me a copy of this person's information. The young man was startled and quickly nodded. Got it, boss. In the mecha training room of the base, Dean appeared in a swamp area. There were demon crocodiles swimming in the swamp, their backs like dead trees. He felt the mecha gradually sinking, and his legs had sunk into the mud. The environment of the abyss difficulty was not optional, and the system would change it accordingly. Perhaps during the course of the battle, the swamp environment would suddenly turn into a desert. No wonder it is abyss difficulty. I am in a desperate situation from the beginning. Dean was calm. He had experienced countless life and death battles. Such a dangerous and desperate situation could not move him at all. He was not in a daze. He quickly made a move. With a hand speed that ordinary people could not achieve no matter how much training they had, the kinetic energy instantly exploded. The legs of the mech spurted flames, blowing up the swamp, and the mech rushed out of the swamp. The surrounding demon crocodiles noticed the movement and quickly roared and rushed forward. Whoosh! Some demon crocodiles opened their mouths and ejected mud cannonballs from their mouths. The power was enough to break giant trees. There were also demon crocodiles whose scales stood up and shot out like bullets. Dudian immediately propped up the energy shield of his mecha and pulled the joystick. His mecha swayed like a ghost as he used the laser sword to find a gap in the dense attacks. His feet stepped on the swamp, but he didn't fall. He rushed towards a crocodile as if he was walking on flat ground. The sword turned and quickly cut off the heads of the crocodiles. 5 minutes later, Dean took off the helmet and exhaled. He felt a little sour. The abyss passed. This result is enough to apply for the 2-star mecha operator examination. Dudian thought in his heart. Although the abyss difficulty was almost perfect, but it was only relative to ordinary people. His physique was far beyond that of ordinary people. Whether it was reaction speed, hand speed, thinking speed, or the ability to adapt to the battle, it wasn't something that ordinary people could compare with. As long as the mecha could bear it, he could do it to the extreme. It's a bit fast to advance from advanced to abyss. I don't know if it will attract the attention of the higher-ups, but there is no time for me to slowly lurk. Once the blood test report is noticed, and the blood type is different from Su Ming's, I will be exposed. Dudian thought in his heart. He must leave here as soon as possible and find a way to get a new identity. However, it was much more difficult to get a black identity in the Federation than in the Imperial Giant Wall. After all, the technology here was advanced. It was estimated that the streets were full of surveillance cameras. All the identity information of the civilians was recorded in the central computer. It was impossible to fabricate. However, fortunately, these problems only troubled ordinary people. He believed that there must be an invisible dark side to the Federation, such as underground transactions. Moreover, he felt that even if the technology here was more advanced than the old era, the body data of all the residents would not be recorded in the central computer. He only needed to find a person with identity and replace him like Su Ming. He looked at the time. Only half an hour had passed. There were still 7.5 hours of training left. Dudian thought for a moment and put on the helmet again. He chose the Abyss difficulty again. This time, he appeared in the forest, surrounded by giant trees, which greatly limited the movement of the mecha. Dudian saw a lot of monsters from the detector. He set the mecha to semi-automatic mode and left the other half to the AI. For example, when the enemy appeared behind the mecha, the machine gun behind the mecha would automatically eject to shoot. He didn't need to operate it. Most of the mecha operators used semi-automatic mode, which was easy and safe. After all, the reaction of a human brain was faster than the AI system. This time, Dudian deliberately injured himself and let the mecha be damaged. He observed the parts and the system of the mecha. When the arm of the mecha was bitten off by a forest wolf, Dudian saw a black liquid sprayed from the mechanical arm. It was like blood, but the color was dark like oil. This was the repair fluid delivered by the energy belt of the mecha. Repeated observation caused the mecha to be quickly damaged and torn apart by the monsters. The challenge was declared a failure. Dudian continued to log in and continued to observe. He had no intention to fight. 8 hours of training quickly ended. When Dean heard the prompt, he took off his helmet and saw that the others in the training room were doing the same movements, but most of them were twisting their necks and sighing. It seemed that they were very tired. Dudian and Zhao Debao followed the crowd to the cafeteria for dinner. When they returned to the dormitory, someone suddenly came to find him. It was the burly young man who brought him to Commander Li's place. "Commander Li is looking for you," the burly young man called out to Dudian. Dudian frowned and his heart sank. Was he going to kill his way out of here tonight? He got up and silently followed. Zhao Debao was also puzzled, but he didn't ask much. He got up and comforted Dudian, telling him not to be nervous. Soon, Dean saw Commander Li again. It was still in his office. However, he wasn't the only one in the office. There were 3 other young men in the office. From their uniforms, they were also mecha operators. "You're all here." Commander Li saw Dudian come in and nodded. "You're in luck. Haas Company picked the 4 of you from hundreds of 1-star mecha operators in the 3rd District. Pack up and go to Haas Company for an interview tomorrow. Of course, if you don't want to go, you can stay. The great cause of the border defense also needs you." Dudian was at a loss. He exchanged glances with the 3 people next to him and saw that their faces were full of surprise and disbelief. It seemed that they had gotten a great thing. Chapter 1063. I want to quit. After hesitating for a moment, Dean opened his mouth. As soon as the words came out, the 3 people next to him turned their heads in astonishment. Some were puzzled, while others looked at him as if he was a fool. Commander Li looked at Dean in surprise. He didn't expect that someone would really apply to quit. Although he said so, he didn't expect these people to stay. After all, everyone knew what the border defense was like. It couldn't be compared to Haas Company. If Haas Company sent him an acceptance letter, he was even willing to resign from his position. "You want to quit?" Commander Li couldn't help but ask again. He was afraid that Dean would be confused and say the wrong words. Dean nodded. "I'm willing to stay and continue to maintain the great cause of the border defense." The corners of the 3 people's mouths twitched slightly. They felt as if a horse had galloped past them. Commander Li was also speechless. He just said some polite words. Who would have thought that this hothead would listen to it? After a moment of silence, Regimental Commander Li sighed. "I'm glad to hear that, but Su Ming, you have to think this through. Even though the border needs people like you, Haas Company's invitation is a pretty good opportunity. Aren't you short on money? Haas Company's salary is at least 3 times what you're getting now, maybe even higher. In addition, this time Haas Company also said that the 4 of you were selected by them. Please be sure to attend the interview. If you really want to stay in the border defense, then give up during the interview. But I still suggest that you seriously consider it. At this moment, he sincerely hoped that Dean could think clearly and stay in Haas' company. He knew about Dean's family situation. He didn't want him to be confused by a few words and choose the wrong path. Must be present for the interview? Dean was surprised. He suddenly felt that there was something unusual about this interview. He secretly speculated, among hundreds of mecha operators, why would they choose Su Ming? His conditions are ordinary, and his skills are also ordinary. Is it because I passed the Abyss difficulty during yesterday's training? If that's the case, then the other three are also mecha operators who passed the Abyss difficulty? If that's not the reason, then I'm exposed. Dean was horrified. The more he thought about it, the more he felt that the possibility was greater. If his identity had been exposed, then the interview invitation from Haas Company was clearly a Hongmin banquet. The three people next to him were just foils to make him look less prominent and lower his guard. If the enemy knows that I'm a demon, then this interview is a bait. Dean's eyes flashed. Think about it carefully. Commander Lee saw that Dean was silent and didn't know what he was thinking. He tried to persuade him and then said to the other three, "This is just an invitation for an interview. It is not a 100% admission. So, the military will temporarily keep your military status. If you fail the interview, you can come back and continue your work. If you pass, then I wish you good luck." "Thank you, Commander Lee." The three of them hurriedly expressed their gratitude. Commander Lee waved his hand and dismissed them. After leaving Regiment Commander Lee's office, the three of them were so excited that they couldn't control themselves. They rubbed their palms together and couldn't wait to pack up and say goodbye to this prison-like training base. Suddenly, a cold voice called out to them from behind. They looked back and saw that it was the hothead who refused the invitation from Haas' company. "Have all of you passed the Abyss difficulty in mecha training?" Dean asked the three of them. The three of them looked at each other. One of them suddenly thought of something and smiled. "Yes, I just passed half a month ago. These days, I'm preparing for the 2-star pilot assessment." The other two were startled and said, "We're almost the same. So, everyone passed the Abyss difficulty training?" One of the young men with a mole on his face suddenly understood and smiled. "It seems that this is the reason why Haas' company chose us. Haha, let's go back and pack up. Don't delay tomorrow's interview." A few of them laughed and left. Dean stood in the same place. His heart was still full of doubts. Was it really because of the Abyss difficulty? So, out of hundreds of mecha operators, only the 4 of them passed the Abyss difficulty? Or this fog bomb was disguised by Haas Company to make it more real? If I refuse, I will be exposed. If I don't refuse, I will likely face an ambush. Dean walked forward and bowed his head in thought. I don't know what kind of existence this Haas Company is. If they know my identity, why didn't they let the military arrange a mission to ambush me at the mission site? Wouldn't that appear more natural and simpler? In any case, since I can't escape, I can only go and see. If it is a trap, I don't know if it can trap me. Unless there's a creator's mecha. Dean felt uneasy and returned to the dormitory. Zhao Debao asked him. Dean's heart moved and immediately told him about the interview with Haas Company. Zhao Debao's reaction was the same as the 3 of them, even more exaggerated than the 3 of them. Zhao Debao was completely stunned. The other people in the dormitory were also stunned. After a short silence, cheers broke out. Several people ran to Dean's side, hooked his neck, hammered his chest, and kept talking with jealousy and envy. "Su Ming, is there smoke coming out of your ancestor's grave? How could you get an interview invitation from Haas Company? Oh my God, get lost. Smoke is coming out of your ancestors' graves. I read Su Ming's fortune a long time ago. He has a bright future. Su Ming, you brat, you're in luck this time. Don't forget about us when you become successful. You are actually mixed in a Haas Company. Do you know what Haas Company does? Even if you go to work as a cleaner, your salary will be higher than ours." "Nonsense. Haas Company doesn't have a cleaner. They use machines to sweep the floor. Haas Company cultivates mecha masters. This is the seed company of Locke's consortium. Su Ming may be able to see a creator's mecha in the future. He may even have the opportunity to touch one or two. Dean listened to their words and collected some useful information. His heart was surprised. Haas's company turned out to be a mecha manufacturing company. Most of the military's mecha came from Haas's company. This company was also the seed company of Locke's Consortium, one of the 4 major consortiums in the Federation. Mecha operators like them were recruited to work as testers in the company. Their status was relatively high. The most important thing was that the treatment and welfare of Haas's company was far better than that of the military. It was the dream of countless mecha operators. The next day. Chapter 1064. The army vehicles escorted them to a road on the edge of the city. Dean and others saw several black, beast-like cars parked on the side of the road. The quality of the cars could be seen from the texture of the paint. Obviously, these cars belonged to the top of the high end. A middle-aged gentleman in a tuxedo was waiting next to the car. He was meticulously dressed, and his hair was neatly dyed pale blonde. He had the demeanor of an upper-class aristocrat. The dark gold watch on his wrist showed his mature temperament. He waved to the army vehicle. When the vehicle stopped, he came forward and showed his identity. He was the assistant of the administrative department sent by the Haas company to pick up Dean and others. Dean and others were surprised by the elegant temperament of the assistant of the director. They had a deeper understanding of the Haas company. They got off the vehicle and were transferred to the black car. Dean learned that the army vehicles were prohibited from driving into the urban area during the peace period of the Federation. This rule made him feel a trace of a different meaning. The car drove along the road into the city. The scenery outside the window was getting clearer and clearer. The faint fog around the road gradually thinned. It didn't take long for Dean to see someone walking on the road in front of the car. He was walking with crutches. He was dressed very sloppily like a beggar. His hair was disheveled as he moved forward along the road. As the car approached, the man seemed to hear the roar of the car engine. He turned his head. Dean saw a dirty face. It was a teenager, but he was starving. The rags on his chest were lifted by the wind. Rows of shriveled ribs could be seen. The teenager's numb eyes suddenly burst into light when he saw the car. He rushed toward the middle of the road and stretched out his hand to stop the car. Damn scavengers! In the passenger seat, the gentlemanly middle-aged man in the tuxedo also saw the young man's figure and cursed in a low voice. His tone was full of disgust. He took out a handkerchief from his trouser pocket and covered his mouth. Then he ordered the driver to roll down the window and stretched his hand out of the window, holding a gun. Dean's eyes flashed coldly when he saw the gun. Bang! With a sudden gunshot, the teenager who tried to stop the car was shot dead. The middle-aged man's marksmanship was excellent. He hit the teenager's forehead directly. The terrifying power of the bullet blew up the teenager's head. He became a headless corpse and fell down. Blood flowed out and dyed the road red. Go around. The middle-aged man in the tuxedo retracted his hand, rolled up the window, and then wiped the gun with a handkerchief covering his mouth. It seemed that the gun was contaminated with germs. He wiped it very carefully and coldly ordered the driver. The driver was very skilled. The car swayed in a slight arc and bypassed the teenager's body. But the people sitting in the car didn't feel much shaking. Dean looked out the window. The youth's blood was still flowing out from his neck. The wind from the car drove the fallen leaves on the ground to cover the blood, but more blood was coming out from under the fallen leaves. Dean turned his head and glanced at the other 3 mecha operators in the car, but found that their expressions were as usual, as if they were used to it and didn't care about it. He was silent for a moment. Suddenly, he felt that something was missing in his heart. He didn't know what he had lost, but there was a voice in his heart murmuring, "It's the same everywhere." The towering steel buildings, gorgeous buildings, and clean cities he saw when he first entered the Federation made him feel that the civilization here had never been lost. He had a feeling of returning to his home 300 years ago. But the action of the middle-aged man in the tuxedo made him feel incredible, as if he woke up from some beautiful fantasy in an instant, and his heart became extremely cold. He didn't ask why the man shot the teenager and what was a scavenger, but he knew that the person who fell was alive. The most horrifying thing was that as the soldiers and mecha operators who protected the Federation and the border, the three people next to him turned a blind eye to it and were used to it. Who were they protecting? The car roared like a beast and galloped on the empty road. The mountains and trees along the way were brushed by. The speed was very fast, but in Dean's dynamic vision, everything felt very slow, enough for him to distinguish every scenery on the road. He saw skeletons on the road, wrapped in rags. Some of the skeletons had bullet wounds, while others were intact. There were also rotten corpses that had been dead for no more than 2 weeks. Birds with black feathers had fallen on the corpses, and their beaks were as big and sharp as those of turtle doves, gnawing on their flesh. The car ran over the edge of these corpses, and some of the bones were about to rot, crushed by the car's wheels. Dean also saw other scavengers, like the teenager, dressed in rags and starving. Some scavengers moved forward alone, some in groups of 2 or 3, big or small. It seemed that they were a family. When these scavengers saw the car, some of them rushed to the road to stop it, but they were shot by the middle-aged man in the tuxedo. When some saw the car, they quickly avoided to the side, seeming to know that their weak body could not stop the steel monster that screamed like a beast. As the car drove longer and longer, Dean saw more and more scavengers. Later, he saw groups of scavengers on the road, wandering aimlessly along the road like zombies. When he saw these groups of scavengers, the middle-aged man in the tuxedo asked the driver to open the roof window and set up a machine gun from inside. Then he put on a gas mask and stood on the co-pilot's seat, ready to shoot. Among the group of scavengers, there seemed to be a leader. Seeing the posture of the middle-aged man in the tuxedo, he quickly scolded the scavengers who were excited to see the car. But his scolding was not powerful enough. Some scavengers obeyed, but more courageously rushed to the road, waving their hands, trying to stop the car. Bang, bang, bang. The machine gun swallowed the flame, and 7 or 8 scavengers were suddenly swept into pieces. The bullets of this machine gun were very powerful, and the body directly exploded after being shot. The car slowed down and ran over the bodies. The rest of the scavengers hid on the other side of the road, trembling with fear. Pairs of black and white eyes looked at the middle-aged man in the tuxedo in fear. Dean looked at the scavengers outside the window, silent. He suddenly roughly guessed why Su Ming's sister had lung cancer at such a young age. In this world, no matter how beautiful it was, there would always be shadows, only because there was light. In the roar of the machine gun, the car gradually drove into the end of the road. Dean could not remember how many scavengers he had killed on the road, until the shadow of the steel building appeared at the end of the road. The middle-aged man in the tuxedo put away the machine gun on the roof, took off the gas helmet, sat on the co-pilot's seat, and wiped the sweat on his neck and face with a new handkerchief. "You guys, wait until we go to Haas Company. You have to work hard and try to pass all of them." After the middle-aged man in the tuxedo breathed smoothly, he turned to Dean and others and smiled politely. "Otherwise, I don't want to go back on the way back. There are too many damn things, and my hands are tired from killing them. Of course, we will definitely pass. I also hope we can pass." The 3 people around Dean laughed. Another person saw Dean was silent, so he patted his shoulder and said, "Don't worry, we will pass." Dean raised his head and looked at him. A smile slowly appeared on his face. The man saw Dean smile, so he also laughed, and then talked to the middle-aged man in the tuxedo in front of him, trying to find out the content of the interview. No one paid attention to Dean, and no one understood his smile. Chapter 1065. Here we are. When the car stopped, the middle-aged man in the tuxedo opened the door. He was very polite. At first glance, it was obvious that he was a gentleman. He turned around and opened the back door, inviting Dean and others to come out. The 4 of them got off and were shocked by the gorgeous world in front of them. "Is this Udyr district?" Suddenly, the young man with a mole next to them was shocked. The other 2 recovered and looked at each other. "This is the most prosperous Udyr district of our copper ship city." Dudian immediately cooperated with them. There was a shocked expression on his face, but in his heart, he secretly remembered the name of the border city and the most central location. "That is the headquarters of our Haas Company in Copper Ship City." The middle-aged man in the tuxedo was not surprised by their shock at all. With a faint smile of superiority on his face, he raised his hand and pointed at an extremely luxurious and magnificent building at the end of the square and said slowly, "The entire Uter district is the territory of our Haas company. I heard that the reason why this place is called Uter district is because the youngest grandson of the 7th master of the Lokfey Consortium is called Uter. It was named after him." Dean was slightly startled. He suddenly realized the background and powerful financial resources of the Lok Consortium, as well as the influence of the Consortium in this place. The three people next to him were aghast. After a long time, they took a deep breath and sighed with emotion. Uter district is actually a person's name. Such a prosperous area, the place with the most wealthy people in Copper Ship City, is actually the property of the Lokfey Consortium. If I can have a street named after me in my lifetime, it will be worth it even if I die. I have long heard of the name of Utyr district. I heard that even the roads here are made of gold. It seems that although the rumors are exaggerated, but it is not much different. If we can pass the interview, we can stay here for a lifetime. Yes, you must be a 5th-class citizen to enter this place. Although we are qualified to come here, but the training of the base is endless. We are not qualified to go out without becoming a 3-star master. The more they spoke, the more excited they became. Their eyes were filled with excitement and even a trace of madness. That was the madness of wanting to pass the interview no matter what. Hearing their words, the middle-aged man in a swallow-tailed coat smiled as he said, "The rumor is not exaggerated. Even poverty limits the imagination of the rumor. Look, although this road is not made of gold, it is made of black bluestone. Black bluestone is not only rare, but also extremely difficult to cut. The cost of building this road is not less than that of gold, but even more expensive." Hearing this, the three of them were dumbfounded. The middle-aged man glanced at Dudian. Although Dudian was curious, he didn't say anything. He couldn't help but look at Dudian again. After all, some people were introverted and didn't like to talk too much. "Let's go." The middle-aged man in the tuxedo withdrew his gaze and walked forward. When the three of them heard this, they lifted their feet and prepared to follow. However, when they thought of what he had said, their footsteps immediately became light and silent. They were almost walking on their tiptoes for fear of stepping too hard. When they thought about how they were walking on black bluestone that was even more precious than gold, they felt as if their entire bodies were about to float. Dudian followed the three of them and turned his head to look at the square. He saw people coming and going. All of them were dressed luxuriously. Even the small jewelry in their hands looked very expensive. Even the annual salary of the mecha operator stationed at the border was not enough to buy one. In addition, many buildings were installed with monitors, and some guards were patrolling the edge of the square. In the world of ordinary people, money is the master, Dudian said in his heart. In the giant wall world of the Empire, wealth didn't mean everything. Power was the master. But here, wealth was power. Soon, the four of them followed the middle-aged man in the tuxedo and came to the largest building at the end of the square. They climbed up the wide steps and came to the towering building. Next to the building was a huge fountain. There was a statue of an old man with a kind face. He was either a great person or a powerful person. He glanced at them and followed them into the building. As soon as they entered the reception hall on the ground floor of the building, Dudian and the other three mecha operators saw two huge mechas standing in the hall. One was 15 meters high, and the other was more than 20 meters high. These two mechas seemed to be pushed out for exhibition. There were many people watching and taking photos in front of them. They were as short as ants in front of the mechas. Their heads only reached the back of the mechas. "It's the Shark Hunter mecha. That's the Sword Tiger T3 mecha. My God." The three people next to them saw the two mechas and couldn't help but stare with excitement. These two mecha did not belong to the army, so they had not served in the military. They were not as mature as the Black Lizard mecha and Wyvern mecha, which were official mecha of the army. Mature here included many aspects, such as mecha manufacturing, operation, practicality, adaptability, and so on. The black lizard mecha was by no means the best among the low-end mechas. It also wasn't the strongest, but its comprehensive factors were enough to rank in the top 3. So it was listed as the representative of the low-end military mecha. The most important factor was that the production cost was relatively low and it could be mass-produced. However, the Shark Hunter mecha and the Sword Tiger mecha in front of him, one was the king of low to mid-range mecha, while the other was the leader of high-end mecha, and both of these mecha were developed by the Haas company. In the eyes of many mecha enthusiasts, the Shark Hunter mecha was the uncrowned king of the low-end and mid-end mecha. It could kill the black lizard mecha in seconds. However, the production cost of this mecha was too high and it couldn't be mass-produced. Plus, it was difficult to operate. Only a 2-star mecha pilot could operate it. However, the Wyvern mecha operated by a 2-star mecha pilot was a little stronger than the Shark Hunter mecha. Plus, it could be mass-produced. So, this made the status of this mecha a little awkward, but it didn't affect its powerful position in the hearts of mecha enthusiasts. Last time, I saw a Shark Hunter mecha killing a rank 7 Thorny Wolf Demon in the Magic Armor Arena. Don't be too strong and kill our black lizard mecha in seconds. The young man with a mole was so excited that he clenched his fist. I saw that video too. It was so exciting. I really want to go up there and fight. The 3 mecha operators were excited. The middle-aged man in the tuxedo smiled and said something to pull the 3 of them back from their thoughts. He brought them to the front desk to register and then took the glass elevator upstairs. They sat in the elevator and looked down at the hall. They felt the magnificence of the building. The hall was very vast. In addition to the 2 huge mecha on display, there were many military weapons. For example, the modified version of the Army's war chariot. Its whole body was covered with sharp swords. It would definitely be a killing machine if it entered the battlefield. The most important thing was that the huge Army's war chariot was hanging on a bracket on the wall. It looked like a toy for people to watch. Soon, the elevator stopped on the 20th floor. After getting out of the elevator, the middle-aged man in a tuxedo swiped his card in front of the elevator next to him. This elevator required a VIP card. After waiting for a while, the door of the elevator opened, and he led them into the elevator. The elevator stopped on the 87th floor. The middle-aged man in the tuxedo took the 4 of them to an office. He knocked on the door, and a majestic voice came from inside. "Please come in." The 3 of them subconsciously swallowed their saliva. They looked nervous. Dean used his X-ray vision to see the situation in the room. There was no ambush. There was only a middle-aged man with broad shoulders sitting on the office chair. He was looking out of the window at the bustling urban area. "Director, they are here," the middle-aged man in the tuxedo respectfully said. Chapter 1066. Please ask. The youth with a mole could not hide the nervousness in their eyes, and quickly flattered. First question, what are the basic keyboard keys of the Wyvern mecha? The supervisor's expression was cold. He raised his head and glanced at the 3 of them. His gaze lingered on Dean, who was behind them, and then shifted away. Although it was just a casual stop, but Dean was keenly aware that this person was coming for him. My identity has been exposed. Dean's eyes flashed. There was no longer any fluke in his heart, but he did not understand the other's purpose. Hearing the question, the youth with a mole and the other 2 looked at each other and saw the astonishment in each other's eyes. It was not that this question was too difficult, but too simple, too ordinary. If it was an ordinary 1-star pilot, they might not know this, but they had been training in the military for many years and had long paid attention to the Wyvern mecha. The basic keyboard keys were clearly written in the introduction of the mecha, so how could it be a difficult question? But was the Hosker Company's interview really that simple? The 3 of them hesitated. They felt that there seemed to be a trap in this question. They fell into contemplation, repeatedly thinking about every word of the supervisor's question. What? No one can answer it. The supervisor frowned slightly. The 3 of them looked at each other, and the youth with a mole braced himself and said, "Supervisor, if I remember correctly, the basic keyboard keys of the Wyvern mecha are a total of 84, of which 28 are the main keys 16 are the auxiliary keys, 17 are the mechanical keys, 9 are the sensor keys, 18 are the exclusive keys of the Wyver Mecha. Speaking up to this point, he looked up at the middle-aged man with some uncertainty. The middle-aged man met his gaze and nodded slightly. Not bad. The answer is very correct and very detailed. The youth with a mole was stunned, and then his face was full of excitement, and he quickly thanked the supervisor. The two people next to him were a little dumbfounded. They did not expect the question to be so simple. They quickly opened their mouths, wanting to answer, but the supervisor raised his hand and stopped them, indicating that there was no need to say anything. Next is the second question. When you came in, you should have seen the Sword Tiger T3 model in the hall. Tell me your views on the advantages and disadvantages of this mecha, the middle-aged man said slowly. I know. The other muscular youth beside him immediately raised his hand. This question was not difficult, but it was much more extensive than the first question. However, the strengths and weaknesses of the Sword Tiger T3 mecha had long since been analyzed by the experts on mecha websites. As a mecha fan, he had also read such articles before, so he remembered them clearly. Thus, he immediately gave his answer. Just as he finished speaking, he suddenly felt a little nervous. Not bad. You're more or less right. The middle-aged man nodded slightly. The sturdy young man was overjoyed, his face filled with excitement. On the other hand, the youth with the mole and the other youth with the crew cut had faces full of vexation. They could also answer this question. After all, the Sword Tiger T3 mecha was just too famous. There were countless analysis articles about this mecha, and among them, they had naturally seen a few of the publicly acknowledged ones. The third question, you answer this one. The middle-aged man looked at the youth with the flat top who hadn't answered the question before and said indifferently, What do you think the main composition of a mecha is? The youth with the flat top was stunned for a moment. He couldn't help but be overjoyed. He was still annoyed that he didn't have time to answer. He didn't expect that the supervisor would personally give him the opportunity. Moreover, this question was too simple. The main composition of a mecha is the body, energy fluid, and mechanical heart. The body can be subdivided into the outer shell. The youth with the flat top slowly said the textbook knowledge, his face full of confidence. When he finished speaking, the middle-aged man nodded slightly. The answer is correct. You answer the last question. The middle-aged man raised his finger to Dean, who was standing at the back, and said with a smile, What do you think is the most powerful 2-star mecha? What's the reason? The three people turned to look at Dean. This question was also very simple. It seemed that Dean could also answer it. Perhaps all four of them would be accepted. While the three people were thinking about this, Dean thought for a moment and said, I think it's the dragon mecha. Hearing this, the three people couldn't help but stare at him. They couldn't help but want to pat him to see if he had woken up. The middle-aged man's mouth revealed a touch of smile. Why? The dragon mecha is a military official 2-star mecha. I believe it is the strongest. Dean answered with certainty. However, these words fell into the ears of the three people next to him. This reason was too simple and brainless. It was just like a hot-blooded youth. Anyone who liked to study mecha knew that the strongest 2-star mecha was the 9 Gods mecha. People preferred to call it the God of Wine mecha. However, even a 3-star master would find it very difficult to operate this mecha. The requirement of the opponent's speed was too high. If it fell into the hands of an ordinary 2-star master, the power it could display was less than half of the dragon mecha. However, as far as the mecha was concerned, this was the king of 2-star mecha. However, the director was next to them, so the three people didn't have time to remind him, lest the director was dissatisfied with them and drag them into the water. They could only give Dean a sigh. Good. The middle-aged man smiled and said, The interview is over. You stay. The other three can leave. The three people looked at the director's finger pointing in Dean's direction. They couldn't help but wonder if he was pointing at something crooked. The youth with a flat top asked, Did we pass, or did he pass? He passed. The director lightly said. The three people were startled. The youth with a mole couldn't help but ask, Why? Didn't we all answer yes? Only his answer was wrong. Why did he pass if he was wrong? The mecha operators that Hawks wants to recruit need to cooperate with us in the development of new mechas. Thus, we need mecha operators who have both skills and are not limited by their thinking. You have indeed answered correctly, but it is clear that your thinking is already deeply rooted in the mechas on the market. Knowing too much might not be a good thing. The middle-aged man indifferently said, "The rules of this interview are like this. Only the wrong answer is considered to pass." Moreover, not only did he answer wrong, but he also thinks that the Dragon Mecha is the best 2-star mecha. Perhaps you will think that he is a hot-blooded youth, but what's wrong with patriotism? The youth with the mole and the other two were stunned speechless. They felt that their minds were completely blank. Only a voice answered them, telling them that this great opportunity had slipped away just like that. The three people didn't dare to question the middle-aged man's words. Under the leadership of the middle-aged man in the tuxedo, they lost their wits and left the office. Dean stood quietly in the same place, but his expression was very calm. He didn't believe the director's words at all. It was too far-fetched. If they really wanted to test their innovative thinking ability, they could have used smarter and more professional questions. Moreover, the biggest problem was that although these questions were simple, they were only for the mecha operators in the Federation. For an invading outsider like him, these questions were unsolvable. "Hello, my name is Rocco." After the three people left, the director reported his name. Obviously, he thought that the three people who left were not qualified to know his identity. "You have passed our Hawks Company's interview and can officially join us. I will now take you to our Hawks Company's mecha production area." Dean looked at him quietly, but didn't move. "I'm very curious. You know my identity. Why didn't you set up any traps here? Do you think that you can stop me with this steel building? Or is it that your life is worthless?" Rocco's pupils slightly shrank, and the smile on his face also froze. After a moment, he slowly eased down. "Mr. Su Ming, what do you mean by this? Do you have any dissatisfaction with our company's interview? You must know something. Before I use force, you'd better say it yourself." Dean's voice was very calm. Rocco's eyelids slightly trembled. Finally, he smiled bitterly and said, "Sure enough, you demon warriors have abilities that ordinary people don't know. I didn't want to beat the grass and scare the snake in advance, but now it's no harm to tell you frankly. Our Hawks Company has no malice towards you. We sincerely want to recruit you." Speaking of this, he felt his body slightly cold. He saw that although Dean's expression didn't change, he suddenly felt as if he was being stared at by a poisonous snake. Goosebumps rose all over his body. His face changed slightly, and he quickly said, "I know we can't stop you here, but if you rashly kill me, your identity will be exposed immediately. The entire Federation will be covered with your wanted notice. I hope we can talk peacefully. I will let you see our Hawks Company's sincerity." Dean felt his pores shrink. He was extremely nervous. The killing intent in his eyes faded. He said, "You took a lot of trouble to bring me from the military to deceive people. You shouldn't want to kill me. Tell me, what is your purpose?" Chapter 1067. You have one more chance to tell the truth. Dean looked straight into his eyes. "I don't know much about you. You took the opportunity to test me by asking them questions. Indeed, there are a lot of things that I don't know, but I'm not as ignorant as you think. Your mecha has an intelligent assistance system, which is enough to make up for the shortcomings of your physique. Even an ordinary person can perceive supersonic attacks with the help of the intelligent assistance system. Why do you need the demon soldiers to be your mecha pilots?" Luoku was stunned for a moment before he smiled bitterly. "Looks like you've grasped quite a lot of things in this short period of time. You're right. With the intelligent support system, our mecha operators can indeed use mechas to fight against the experts of our demon race. However, the intelligent assistance system can help, but it is not perfect. There are some combat situations that the intelligent system can't deal with. After all, the abilities of the demon soldiers are strange, and their fighting methods are different. Moreover, they are constantly changing. Even if the intelligent system has recorded all the known fighting methods, there are still countless unknown fighting methods that the intelligent system can't deal with." Dean slightly frowned as he stared at Roke. Although the latter was nervous, But he wasn't lying. Moreover, relying too much on the intelligence system will eventually lead to our mecha pilots becoming chicken ribs. Some people have wanted to build a fully intelligent combat mecha. They would rely on artificial control in the background. There would be no need for a mecha pilot. Once such a mecha appears, it will be subversive to the war and to your demon race. Moreover, it will also bring about unpredictable changes to our Federation. Luo Ku smiled and said, "Our Haas company adheres to the belief that manpower is better than intelligence. We believe that the most powerful mecha are those that are operated by humans in battle. However, it is difficult for human physical fitness to keep up with the response of the mecha. Even with the intelligent assistance system, sometimes the response of the mecha pilot is not timely and leads to mistakes. As a result, they are killed by the demon soldiers." "So, you want the demon soldiers to operate your mecha?" Dean stared at him. "I heard that your Hawks company is a subsidiary of the Lock Consortium. You mainly produce and sell mecha. Are all the parts of your mecha produced and assembled by your own factory?" Luo Ku was stunned for a moment. "Of course. Our mecha manufacturing industry chain is very complete. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to monopolize the market. Even the military's mechas are supplied by our company. All the parts, including the intelligent auxiliary system." Dean stared at his eyes. "Mecha monopoly? Don't the other three consortiums have any mecha industries?" Rocco was puzzled as to why Dean would ask about these insignificant things. There would be time to understand them later. Shouldn't Dean care about his future or treatment? Luo Ku thought for a moment and said, "The foundation and financial resources of Hawk Corporation are enough to protect you, but you have to listen to our company's arrangements. You don't have to worry about anything else." Luo Ku shook his head. "I just think that if you really monopolize the mecha market, you wouldn't take such a risk. You want to borrow the demon soldiers to develop your own mecha. I think there should be other consortiums threatening the cake in your hands. Either you want to achieve a real monopoly, or your purpose isn't just to monopolize the mecha." Luo Ku's eyelids twitched. He didn't expect Dean to ask about this. He couldn't help but look at the young man. He looked a few years younger than him. How could he have such a deep shrewdness? "These are the matters of the top. I don't know." Luo Ku shook his head and avoided Dean's threatening eyes. He frowned. "These are not the things you should care about. You have sneaked into our Federation. Now your identity has been exposed. Even if you kill me, you will be buried with me. Today's interview is not only between you and me. There are many people who are paying attention to this place. Do you think that our company will not consider the factor of your disobedience after knowing that you are a demon?" Dean indifferently said, "Of course, I know that there should be a lot of people watching our conversation behind the monitoring heads. As long as I twist off your head, I estimate that the alarm will go off. You have already prepared your force and will immediately surround this place. Rest assured, I will cooperate with you. I am also very interested in your mecha. Cooperate is good." Luo Ku was secretly relieved. He was appointed by the superior and had given a death order. He even settled his wife and children in advance. He came to interview Dean with the mentality of going to the battlefield. If it was not necessary, he didn't want to anger the demon. After all, he was the director of Hawks Corporation. His life was much more valuable than a demon. "Mister, may I know your name?" "Dean." "Dean?" There was a trace of strangeness in Luo Ku's eyes. This was the surname of the Chinese civilization in the Federation, but the name was a bit Western beautification. It was a bit incongruous. He didn't ask much. He got up and said, "Mr. Dean, please follow me to our Hawks Corporation's Demon Mecha factory." Dean nodded. The middle-aged man in tuxedo had returned when the two left the office. Luo Ku ordered him to prepare the car. When the two went downstairs, there were several dark black chariots with falcon marks parked at the entrance of the hall. The two got on the middle one. A man and a woman were sitting in the car. They stared at Dean. When Dean saw the two, he was a little surprised. The heat of the two completely exceeded that of ordinary people. They were comparable to pioneer-level warriors. Now that his identity had been exposed, he didn't bother to hide it anymore. A golden light flashed in his eyes, and he instantly saw through the two people's bodies. He frowned when he saw that there was a demonic mark on each of their chests. Sure enough, they were two magic marks warriors. Dean's eyes flickered. It seemed that what Luo Ku said before was basically true. Moreover, their project to develop the demon mecha should have been started for a long time. The chariot started and roared out of Udyr district. Are these the demon warriors who sneaked in? The man and woman looked at Dean up and down and asked Luo Ku. Luo Ku nodded and introduced them to Dean. These two are also demon warriors. He is called Song Ming, and she is called Xiuhan. They are both 3-star demon warriors. Our demon warriors here are divided into 5 levels like ordinary demon warriors. But the difficulty of operation is completely different. If they pretend to be ordinary demon warriors, they could be listed as 5-star legendary level. Chapter 1068. Protoss Warrior? Dean frowned slightly and looked at Songming. His heart was slightly moved. The latter spoke standard Chinese, and he was young. He didn't give the feeling of killing intent like other pioneer-level warriors. Could it be that he was a demon warrior cultivated by the Federation? Roke was severely reprimanded by his Songming. He coughed lightly and said, I was negligent. Both of you are outstanding Protoss warriors of Haas Company. This is Dean, a demon from the other side of the magic wall. Is this the real demon warrior? Song Ming and Shuehan looked at Dean. They saw that his cheeks were well-defined. It seemed that he had a lot of combat experience. His body was well-proportioned. His muscles were faintly revealed under his clothes, but it was not ostentatious. In addition to that, there was nothing special about him. There was some disappointment in Song Ming's eyes. He said to Dean, You sneaked into our Federation. Was it an order from the higher-ups, or did you do it yourself? Dean turned his head and looked at the scenery outside the chariot's window. He didn't respond. Song Ming's face flashed with anger. He coldly said, I'm asking you a question. Demon, your identity has been exposed. Why are you still pretending in front of me? Do you believe that I can make you kneel down and beg with just one word? Roke's face slightly changed. He quickly persuaded. Song Ming, he is the person that the higher-ups want. The board of directors is very interested in Mr. Dean. His identity can't be easily exposed. Otherwise, you and I will be punished. Board of directors? Song Ming's eyelids twitched slightly. Although he was quite proud, the board of directors was not something he could provoke. Everything he had was given by the consortium. Naturally, it could be deprived. Forget it. Don't care about a demon. Shuehan knew that Song Ming cared about his face, so she gently persuaded him. Song Ming coldly snorted and didn't speak again. Dean's eyes retracted from the window. He looked at Song Ming and smiled. You dare to provoke me. Song Ming saw Dean smile. He was furious. This kid thought that he didn't dare to hurt him and deliberately ridiculed him. However, before he could finish his thoughts, he suddenly felt a shadow flash in front of him. Then a severe pain came from his cheek. He forgot everything for a moment. There was only this pain in his mind. He felt his cheeks being squeezed to the point where they were about to shatter, and even felt death approaching. The force pulled him forward, and his body involuntarily followed that force. He did not dare to resist, for fear that his face would be torn off. With a plop, Song Ming slid forward from the chair and knelt on the chariot. At this time, the pain on his face dissipated. Song Ming opened his eyes and found himself kneeling in front of Dean. He was shocked and angry. Just as he was about to stimulate the unparalleled power in his body, he suddenly saw Dean raise his palm and slap him in the face, accompanied by bursts of buzzing sound. Song Ming felt a little dizzy, his vision was shaking, and he involuntarily fell to the ground. The next moment, a boot stepped on his face. Smiling at you is not my courtesy to you, but my warning. Dean was still smiling. He stepped on Song Ming's face and looked up at Shuehan. Shuehan saw Dean smile and heard his words. She felt cold sweat all over her body. She was sitting next to Song Ming. She only saw that Dean grabbed Song Ming's face with one hand, pulled him from the chair to kneel, and then slapped him to the ground. She wanted to help, but everything happened too fast. Moreover, when Dean made the first move, she had a warning in her heart. Even if she helped, she would not be able to save anything, and even she would be attacked. It turned out that her intuition was right. Although it was a sneak attack, but since he could defeat Song Ming, his strength was not inferior to her. Mr. Dean. Roke was scared. He only saw something flash in front of his eyes, and then he saw Song Ming fall at Dean's feet. He didn't expect that Dean would attack Song Ming. The bloodthirsty and ferocious image of the demon warriors had long been deeply engraved in his heart. He couldn't help but be frightened. He was worried that Dean would be angered and start a massacre. Although from a rational point of view, starting a massacre was not good for Dean, but who could guarantee that these bloodthirsty demons were rational people? If you kill me, you will be wanted by our Haas company. Shuehan heard Roke's words and immediately responded in a cold tone. Dean smiled when he heard this. Huh. Suddenly, there was a slap in the face. Shuehan's head was suddenly slapped to the side and hit the car door. Her forehead was slightly red and 5 faint fingerprints appeared on her snow-white cheek. Your lives are not worth the damage to me. Dean's voice was very light. He smiled. Although my identity has been exposed and I am in a predicament, but it doesn't mean that you could be rude in front of me. Shuehan's brain was buzzing. The slap made her feel that her brain was shaking. It took a while for her to recover. Her eyes widened in disbelief. She didn't expect Dean to be so fierce. She didn't expect that this seemingly quiet and handsome young man would hit a woman like her. Roke didn't dare to breathe. After hearing Dean's words, he was a little relieved. He quickly smiled. Mr. Dean, don't be angry. They didn't mean any harm. I also didn't mean any harm. Dean smiled. Otherwise, they would be dead. Roke's heart trembled, and he didn't dare to say anything. Shuehan heard Dean's words. She felt the hairs on her body stand up. She didn't doubt the authenticity of Dean's words. Demons were famous for their ferocity and violence. They had the bestial nature of monsters. It was not strange for them to eat human flesh. There was a brief silence in the car. The car swayed as it drove out of the urban area. It gradually came to the outskirts of the town area. Can you make him get up? Perhaps Dean didn't have any further malicious actions, or Dean's quiet and handsome appearance was difficult to associate with the word ferocious. Shuehan gathered her courage and whispered to Dean. Dean turned to look at her in surprise. Who? Shuehan looked embarrassed. The one under your feet. He offended me. I gave him a chance to kneel down. Dean smiled softly. Many people don't even have the chance to kneel down. Shuehan slightly pursed her lips. She wanted to persuade him again, but when she saw the smile on Dean's face, she suddenly felt cold and didn't dare to open her mouth again. Roke was worried about offending Song Ming. At the moment, he saw Shuehan had given up persuading him, so he was at ease in silence. At the same time, he glanced at Song Ming, who was firmly stepping on Dean's feet. He thought of the previous attitude that made him lose face and secretly felt a little happy. Chapter 1069. Dudian didn't see the gorgeous sky railway nor the shining steel buildings in the town outside the chariot. There were only ordinary bungalows made of concrete and bricks. There were many civilians riding rusty bicycles on the streets. It was an old-fashioned feeling of the 1980s. It was a far cry from the bustling urban area that was full of futuristic sense of technology. He also saw ragged scavengers lying on the roadside. They were skinny and surrounded by flies. The civilians around them avoided them and covered their noses. Is the factory in the suburbs? Dean asked Roke. Roke instinctively trembled and quickly said, Mr. Dean, don't be impatient. It's in the wilderness on the outskirts of the factory. It's a long way from here, but with the speed of our pushcart, we'll be there soon. Dean slightly frowned. This city was built by your ancestors. Since the population of the city isn't so large, why did they encircle such a large area? Roke smiled. In the past, the population of the city was much larger than it is now. Later, because of the pollution of water resources, more and more people were infected by the nuclear radiation. It affected fertility and led to a gradual decrease in the number of offspring. Moreover, after the establishment of the government in the center of the city, people in the periphery slowly migrated to the center of the city. After a long time, the towns near the center of the city were overcrowded. The suburbs became ghost towns. No one lived there. Only those damn scavengers lived in those ghost towns. Dean was silent. At this moment, gunshots suddenly came from the front. Dean and Rocco looked ahead and saw a middle-aged man dressed as a police officer rolling down the window of a Prius tank in front of them. He shot and killed a scavenger who was blocking the road. The pushcart quickly passed by the scavengers. A body fell on the ground. It was a 7- or 8-year-old child. His eyes were fixed on one place. Why are they called scavengers? Dean looked at the suburban road outside the window and asked Roke. Roke slightly covered his nose and frowned. Rocco slightly covered his nose as he frowned. It seemed that he could smell something bad even through the window. He didn't hide his disgust and disgust. These things are like rats. They look for food everywhere. They eat everything. That's why we call them scavengers. Their bodies are full of bacteria and viruses. Mr. Dean shouldn't get close to them. Even a demon warrior like you may not be able to resist some of the viruses. Moreover, these things can't be killed. Once you kill a batch, another batch will come out. Dean could not help but frown when he heard his words. He noticed that Rocco had used these things twice in a row to address these scavengers. These scavengers should be his kind, and listening to his words, these scavengers were just people who were seriously infected by nuclear radiation. Rocco and the middle-aged man in tuxedo were the elites in the urban area. They only knew that these scavengers would eat anything, but they never thought that if they were not too hungry, who would be willing to eat garbage? Sympathy and mercy were for the weak. But in their eyes, perhaps these scavengers were not even weak. It was just like people's first reaction when they saw cockroaches was to pick up a slipper and kill it. This type of regional discrimination had existed from the olden era until now, never disappearing, just like outsiders and country bumpkins. It was to the extent where the one who spoke wouldn't even feel like their words carried any discrimination, but rather treated it as a form of address. Dean had a dull feeling as he thought of this. He leaned back on the seat. His body slightly swayed along with the chariot. His thoughts gradually drifted away as he was lost in thought. Half an hour later, the pushcar drove from a dry plain to a green space. There were more than a dozen huge windmills outside the green space. In addition, there were a lot of solar panels on the ground to absorb heat. Shuehan opened the door and took the lead to jump out. Roke followed her. Dean also got up and bent down to get off the car. His feet naturally stepped on Song Ming's face. After Dean got off the car, Song Ming immediately turned over and climbed up. He felt that his neck was a little stiff, like a stiff pillow. He gritted his teeth and twisted it hard. He only heard the sound of his neck bones cracking. He felt a lot more comfortable, but the burning pain on his face was still there. He clenched his fists and didn't dare to look at Shuehan outside the car. He just hurriedly glanced under her clothes to know her position. Then he jumped out of the car. He clenched his fists and stared at Dean with resentment in his heart. Dean turned his head and saw Song Ming's eyes. He faintly smiled and said, "You can hate me, but you can't provoke me. Do you understand?" Song Ming felt a burst of anger rushing to the top of his head. He almost broke out, but he still endured it. He turned his head and clenched his fists. His body trembled slightly. Dean's words meant that he could hate him, but he couldn't show it in front of him. Even if he hated him, he could only hate him from the bottom of his heart. These words completely didn't put him in his eyes and completely despised him. Shuehan glanced at Song Ming and saw his slightly trembling fists. She sighed in her heart. She knew that Song Ming always wanted to save face and was incomparably proud. Now that he was completely despised, she guessed that his heart was filled with hatred. However, seeing that Song Ming was able to hold back his anger, she was a little relieved. At the same time, she had a higher opinion of him. "Mr. Dean, please." Roke timely opened his mouth. It seemed that he was trying to smooth things over for Song Ming, but he was very happy in his heart. In his eyes, there was no difference between Song Ming and Dean. They were both ugly demon warriors. Bah! Roke led the way forward. Dean and Shuehan kept up with Song Ming at the end. Suddenly, Dean slapped Song Ming's face. Song Ming was caught off guard and fell down on the grass. He looked at Dean with a dull face. He was puzzled, but soon his eyes turned red. He grabbed the grass on the ground and crushed it. His body trembled in anger. He almost suppressed his anger and roared, "What are you doing?" Shuehan and Roke also had some doubts. They looked at Dean and wanted to say something, but stopped. I said, "You can hate me, but don't provoke me." Dean took back his palm and lightly said, "It's your fault to show killing intent behind my back." Shuehan and Roke quickly came forward to help Song Ming. "Let's go back and talk about it. You go in front with me." Song Ming shook off her palm. He gritted his teeth and quickly walked forward. He soon got rid of several people. Roke coughed and said, "Mr. Dean, this way, please." They walked to the middle of the grass. Behind a few rows of solar panels, there was a small bungalow made of metal. Dean used his X-ray vision to glance at the bungalow. Sure enough, it was an underground processing plant. It was very wide, with a lot of machinery and workers. There was a guard in front of the bungalow. He stopped Song Ming. "Please show your ID card." Song Ming roared in anger. "Are your dog eyes blind? I just left here. Can't you see?" Several guards looked cold. One of them raised a laser gun. "If you don't show your ID card, I will shoot." Song Ming's body trembled. He took out the ID card from his pocket and threw it at the guard. The guard looked at it and nodded. He returned the ID card to him. "Watchdogs, wait for me." Song Ming put away the ID card and angrily walked into the bungalow. Roke took Dean and Shuehan to the guard. He showed them a document. The guard opened it and looked at it. He nodded and let them pass. There was an elevator in the bungalow that led to the underground factory. Dean saw a huge golden sculpture on the first floor of the factory. It was a handsome young man with an oriental face. "This is the founder of the Rockwell Consortium, Rockwell Polk." Roke introduced the golden sculpture to Dean in a respectful manner. "This is the most handsome man I have ever seen, second only to the god of science and technology. He is close to perfection." Shuehan looked at the face of the golden sculpture and smiled. Dean lightly said, "The perfect person is the god. The god of science and technology is the perfect god." Roke laughed. "The perfect god is the devil." Dean indifferently said. Roke and Shuehan were surprised. The smile on their faces disappeared. Roke frowned. "Mr. Dean, slander the god of science and technology is a felony." "Well, let's go." He took Dean to the office on the first floor of the underground processing plant. He knocked on the door. "Come in." Luoku pushed the door open and entered. Inside was a burly man with thick arms and a round head. He was sitting on a swivel office chair with 2 bottles of red wine on the table in front of him. He wore a few thick gold rings on his fingers and looked very rustic. "Manager," Roke called out in a respectful tone. The burly man looked up and his eyes fell on Dean's body. "Is this the devil?" "This is Mr. Dean from the Magic Wall." Roke replied politely. The burly man snorted and got up. "I know. There is nothing for you to do here. Go back." Rocco nodded, turned around, and left the office. His mission was over. Chapter 1070. Dean followed, but Shuehan didn't follow. He turned to look at her and said with a faint smile, "Aren't you a bodyguard? Aren't you afraid that I'll kill this big guy?" The strong man in front heard Dean's words, and his mouth twitched. He snorted and said, "Mr. Dean, I know you're very strong, but I advise you not to do something stupid. Otherwise, your identity, your image, and your body data will be announced to the world. With the strength of our Federation, it won't be difficult to catch you." Shuehan knew that Dean was just deliberately scaring the strong man, so she smiled and said, "My duty is to escort you here. Now that you're here, I have nothing to do." Then she turned and left. Dean shrugged and retracted his gaze, but a trace of coldness flashed in his eyes. The strong man led the way to an elevator and took it with Dean. Dean looked up and down at the base and saw many heat sources. Most of them were hunters, and a small number were limitless ones. The number of pioneers was even fewer, only 20 or 30 in total. Among them, there were actually 4 heat sources of Dominator level. This should be a branch factory. Haas Company can be found in hundreds of cities in the Federation. There may be Abyssal-level masters in the headquarters factory. Dean thought in his heart. With the financial resources of the Federation, it wasn't difficult to cultivate Abyssal walkers. However, demon warriors were the existence of the dark side of the Federation, and they were the enemy of the border. They weren't allowed to exist in public, so they couldn't be cultivated in large quantities. Soon, the elevator came to the deepest level of the underground factory, the 5th floor. 2 of the 4 dominator heat sources were on this floor, and there were the least heat sources on this floor. There were no more than 30 people in total. Golden light flashed in Dean's eyes, and he looked through the elevator and the walls to look at the 5th floor. There were many huge mechas on this floor. These mechas were very strange, and there were parts of flesh and muscles in the mechas. In addition, there were 3 huge dark areas on this floor, which his X-ray vision couldn't penetrate. It showed that the material of these 3 dark areas was very hard, comparable to the material of the magic insect spaceship. Dean frowned slightly and slowly walked out of the elevator. "This way, please," said the robust man. He unconsciously added the word please. He retracted his previous cold attitude so as to not infuriate the bloodthirsty demon clansman. Dean followed him along the corridor. Along the way, he could not see many huge mechas standing on the edge of the wall. Some are more than 10 meters high, like a human shape, and some are more than 20 meters long, crawling on the ground like a giant crocodile. Some of these mechas had scales on the surface, while others had metal shells. Most of them had muscle fibers on the inside. They looked like mechas that were a mixture of half metal and half flesh. These mecha, are they all transformed from the bodies of monsters? Dean was shocked, but he didn't say it out loud, so as not to expose his clairvoyance ability. After a moment, they came to an oval building. This building was one of the 3 dark areas that Dean couldn't penetrate. The brawny man raised his hand and took fingerprints on the door. The building opened. He said to Dean and took the lead to go in. Behind the door was a spacious room with many mechs standing in it. In the middle was a glass-like cylinder. The brawny man walked in and gestured to Dean. Dean also stood in the cylinder. He saw the brawny man enter fingerprints on the button next to the cylinder door. Soon, the cylinder door was closed. The next moment, the cylinder sank like an elevator, falling more than 10 meters down. Suddenly, there was light around it. It fell into a huge silver-white room made of pure metal. In the middle of the room, there was a protruding viewing platform, like the head of a spaceship had crashed into it. At this moment, there were 4 or 5 figures standing behind the viewing platform. In the middle was a handsome young man who looked gentle and elegant. He was talking and laughing with the people around him. Dean looked at the young man, who also looked at him. Their eyes met, and the young man nodded to him with a smile. He was very polite. Dean's heart suddenly sank. He suddenly reached out and grabbed the brawny man's shoulder. The brawny man was so scared that his body trembled. He said in horror, what are you doing?" Dean's fingers slightly tightened. The brawny man's face suddenly twisted in pain and loudly begged for mercy. At this time, the cylinder sank to the bottom of the metal room. Several people on the high platform in front of them stopped talking and looked down at Dean in the cylinder. When they saw that Dean was holding the brawny man in his hand, they frowned. "Hello, what's your name?" A gentle male voice came from the metal wall. It seemed to come from all directions. Dean couldn't find the specific direction. Dean looked around. There was no individual speaker. The voice seemed to be transmitted through the metal wall, through some kind of resonance. His face became cold as he indifferently said, "Dean." "Hello, Mr. Dean. I'm the president of Hosk's Copper Ship Branch, Felix." The gentle male voice continued to come. Dean saw that the mouth of the handsome young man in the center of the viewing platform was moving. Obviously, it was him who was talking. Such a young man was the president of Hosk's Copper Ship Branch. It could be seen that this person had a great background. Dean said in a cold voice, "That's the boring introduction. Can we talk about the business?" Felix smiled and said, "Since Mr. Dean can't wait any longer, then I won't waste any more time talking nonsense. The main reason we're looking for you is that we hope that you can join our Haas company. As you can see, you're not alone here. There are many demon warriors like you. We hope that you can be like them and contribute to our company. We'll definitely treat you well in the future. If I say I'm willing, can I leave here?" Dean looked straight at him. Felix smiled. "If Mr. Dean agrees, we can sign a contract. In addition, we also need Mr. Dean's cooperation to implant our god's nucleus. This way we can ensure that both of us can be at ease." God's nucleus? Dean revealed a puzzled look. In his mind, he used his X-ray vision to scan Song Ming and Shui Han's body condition. He sneered in his heart. "It's a very small chip that needs to be implanted in your brain. But don't worry, our technology is very advanced. It won't cause any damage to you." Felix smiled. "Isn't this the same as the military needing the absolute loyalty of a 5-star mecha pilot? You can just say that you want to bury a bomb in my brain." Dean's face became not so good, and he said coldly. Felix sighed. "That's the case, but this is the only way to ensure that we can communicate peacefully. As long as you don't have malicious intentions, we will never hurt you." Everyone is very relieved. "I hope you can seriously consider it." Dean couldn't help but smile. "In that case, why not implant a bomb in your brain? I believe that we can also maintain peaceful communication. Well, I can even be generous. I don't need to implant anything in your brain. We can also communicate peacefully with you." The smile on Felix's face gradually faded, and he calmly said, "Since Mr. Dean hasn't thought it through, I can only let you think about it for a while. You can come out now." Felix's words were somewhat contradictory, but Dean reacted in an instant. He knew that the latter sentence was said to the strong man beside him. Felix deliberately didn't mention his life. Perhaps it was to give him a chance to be in a daze. Sure enough, when Dean noticed the strong man, he saw that his fingers quickly pressed the button on the door while enduring the pain. The next moment, Dean felt a crisis coming. He quickly grabbed the strong man's shoulder and pulled him into his arms. The strong man was shocked. His eyes widened, and his face was full of fear. Puff! 2 lasers rose from the top and bottom and connected together to form a barrier that isolated half of the strong man's previous position. But because the strong man was grabbed by Dean, he didn't have time to move his lower body over. His lower body was cut off by the laser from the waist down. If Dean had continued to grab the strong man's shoulder, it was estimated that his arm would have been cut off by the laser. Intestines and viscera flowed out of the man's abdomen and fell on Dudian's boots and feet. The place where Dudian had been standing was suddenly ejected. His legs bounced to the top of the ground and were sent out. Dean released his hand. The strong man was already dead. Seeing this bloody scene, the 5 people on the viewing platform slightly frowned. Felix coldly said, "You knew it before?" Dean saw that the cylinder was opened and immediately walked out. He shook off the stomach organs and intestines that were hanging on the back of his feet. He indifferently said, "It seems that you are very skilled in this trick. In order to send me to this cage, you didn't hesitate to let a manager accompany me down. But your mistake is that you shouldn't have marked the ground and divided the area to stand." Chapter 1071. Dean was surprised to see that Felix wasn't angry about the death of the manager. After all, the manager wasn't a scavenger. He was a legal citizen of the Federation and was protected by federal law. Dean was relieved. Hosk might not have the right to openly kill a legal citizen, but there was no witness to the death of the manager. He could find a reason, such as a work accident that led to death. Then he could compensate the family some money and the matter would be over. "Mr. Dean, I'll come back when you think about it." Felix looked down at Dean, smiled, and turned away. The people around him hugged each other and left with him. Dean took back his eyes and looked at the pure metal room. It was thousands of square meters wide and 40 to 50 meters high. If it was a cage, it would definitely be a luxury of a presidential suite. His eyes flashed as he glanced at the surrounding walls. He saw lines of light distributed on the pure silver walls like a lattice. These lines were places where his eyes could penetrate. It showed that this place wasn't a complete iron plate. Perhaps the role of these lines was to transmit sound or to replace the air. In any case, this was a breakthrough for him to get out. Dean didn't act immediately. Instead, He glanced at every inch of the room. He looked at the monitoring system, but found that there was no monitoring system installed in the room. Obviously, the installation of monitoring system would lead to flaws in this perfect cage. Secondly, even if there was monitoring system installed, it would be destroyed by the angry demons if it wasn't hidden. It was meaningless. The only monitoring system was above the viewing platform. Most of the area in the cage could be seen, but the bottom of the platform was a place where the monitoring system couldn't reach. Dean went to the area outside the monitoring system. He was about to use the Devil's Division to try to attack the wall, but suddenly an idea flashed in his mind. Insidious. The monitoring system on the viewing platform may be a deliberate decoration. Since they have locked me here, how can they not find a way to control all my actions? Leaving this area outside the monitoring system, anyone would think of coming here to avoid the monitoring system. So what's the point of their monitoring system? This is just a decoration so that I can use my power and expose my secrets here with a peace of mind. A person is the most relaxed and careless when they are alone. They should have a way to monitor me through other methods. Dean's face sank. The level of technology here was very high. It was not unusual for there to be technology beyond his knowledge to monitor him. After pondering for a moment, Dean used the turtle's magic mark ability. The skin on the back of his hand became like a rock. Fine yellow scales grew on his skin. He punched the wall, but the wall was not damaged. Dean's face sank slightly. He had used the power of the lower abyss for this punch. Considering that the other party was monitoring him, it was possible that they could sense the strength of his body through his attack, just like a life detector. Therefore, it seemed more realistic to expose the power of the lower abyss. After all, if the other party knew his identity, it was possible that they would trace the whole process of him sneaking into the Federation. If the other party had seen the other two mechs that he had cut open and obtained the information collected by the military investigation team, it would not be difficult to analyze that his strength was at the abyss level and was close to the middle abyss level. It seems that this thing was specially built for me. Dean looked at the still, flat wall and suddenly remembered that there were 3 dark areas that he could not see before. Could it be that the other 2 cages also held demons like him? It seems that the Lock Consortium may not only intervene in the military, but can even secretly control the battlefield. Dean's eyes flashed. The influence of the Lock Consortium could be seen by using the captured demons for research. There were 3 such consortiums in the Federation. This was a world dominated by consortiums. Financial power was equal to force and a high status. The next moment, Dean's face showed an unwilling and angry expression. As if he had exhausted all his strength, his whole body was petrified. The power of petrification extended along his arms and turned into 2 extremely sharp stone swords in the palm of his hand. The stone swords seemed to be connected to his body and were part of his body. He slashed at the wall. Whoosh! Whoosh! Dean was shocked back and rolled out of the shadow area under the observation platform. He quickly put away the petrification on his body and lifted the demonic body. He crawled back into the shadow and gasped for breath. After resting for a moment, Dean got up and walked to the wall. He saw that there were only 2 shallow white marks left on the wall. This was a desperate result. With the attack of the stone swords, it might take tens of thousands of continuous slashes to be able to cut the wall, but it was only a possibility. No one knew how thick the wall was. Dean's face showed disappointment. He sat on the ground and lowered his head in frustration. This scene appeared on the screen, and it also appeared in the eyes of Felix, who was in front of the screen. He looked at the image on the monitor, and his eyes lit up slightly. It really is an Abyss Walker. I didn't expect such a fellow to come uninvited and actually infiltrate our Federation. Fortunately, we managed to uncover him. Otherwise, who knows how much damage he would have caused. The President is right. This is all thanks to you. This little guy is desperate. I guess he is now thinking about cooperating with us. The demon warriors are really extraordinary. The power contained in these dirty bodies is really terrible. They can actually destroy this chromium alloy wall with their flesh. Several well-dressed gentlemen next to him complimented and sighed with emotion. Felix smiled and said, "Looking at this person's magic, he should be a defensive type. He can petrify his body. Not bad, not bad. This way, we can use him to practice with our mecha. We can last a while longer." The president is wise. Haha, he thinks that he can refuse to serve us just because he refused us. It's ridiculous. From the moment he came in, he was destined to work for us. If he is killed by the mecha president, can I apply for his body to be sent to our R&D department? Felix chuckled. Of course you can, but his value should be to help us perfect the mecha. Everyone, go and inform the others. The magic battle mecha has begun. Remember, you can bet, but you can't influence the result. You can't sell his information either. Otherwise, once you're found out, no matter how much you eat, you will have to spit it out, including your life. Several people next to him nodded. They understood the rules. It shouldn't be so boring to lock me here. Dean leaned against the wall, the corners of his mouth slightly curved. If it was me, they would force me to give them mecha training. If I don't think of this, maybe I have to find a way to hint to them. Only then can I leave. Oh no, leaving would be meaningless. 3 o'clock. Chapter 1072. In the blink of an eye, Dean stayed in the pure silver room for 3 days. Felix didn't come to disturb him. Every day when it was time to eat, bloody ingredients would be thrown in from the hidden valve. Dean tried to attack from the hidden valve, but the design of the hidden valve was very clever. It was like a drainage pipe. The ingredients slid from top to the bottom. The space inside was very narrow, only as thick as the mouth of a bowl. Above the hidden valve was the same hard metal valve. Even if he shrank his bones and elongated his body to drill inside, he would be blocked by the valve above. Clearly, these people did not see him as a human. The food that was thrown in was all fresh meat, stained with blood. There were no trays or other utensils. It was as if they were feeding a ferocious beast. Dean secretly used X-ray to check the meat. It was rich in protein and nutrition. There was no virus infection nor destructive bacteria contamination. There were only some common germs. These germs might make ordinary people sick and have a fever, but for him, it was completely ignored. As long as there was no undead virus, Dean felt that the origami factor in his body was enough to kill most of the germs. Dean ate, drank, and defecated in the pure silver room. Moreover, there was no toilet paper. He could use his magic marks to solve the hygiene problem, but in order to avoid the exposure of his ability, he endured. He let himself be contaminated with dirt and embarrassed. Do you want to wear out my patience? It's useless. I won't admit defeat. I won't be convinced even after 100 years if you lock me up like this. During the rest of the time, Dean would come to the monitoring area of the viewing platform from time to time. He would shout loudly, hoping that his words could give some hints to the other party. But there was still no movement from above. If it was an ordinary person, they would have been a little irritated. Dean was very irritated. In addition to sitting quietly thinking, his eyebrows were always locked. From time to time, he would abruptly raise his fist and hit the wall, or suddenly stamp his feet. He seemed to be in some kind of anxious mood. He knew that the other party didn't come out because they want to see this. On the 5th day, Dean was leaning against the wall with a gloomy face. Suddenly, a voice came from the top of his head. He looked up and saw Felix and several other well-dressed, middle-aged, and elderly figures coming to the viewing platform. Obviously, they were the top executives of Haas Company. Felix spoke in a gentle voice. "Mr. Dean, do you want to consider the cooperation?" Dean's face was gloomy. "Don't think about it. I knew it. You demons are tough." Felix smiled and said, "Unfortunately, you have the power of a devil, but you don't have the brains to match it. Even if you refuse us, you still have to serve us. In this world, no one can refuse me. Refuse Lok Fei." Dean's heart jumped. He was pleasantly surprised, but his face changed slightly. "What do you mean? You can't get out of this cage, but I can let our mechas in." Felix smiled and said, "You'll be fighting with the latest mecha developed by our Hosker company, helping us perfect our mecha's combat system. You have no choice but to cooperate. If you don't fight, you'll be killed by our mecha." You can only choose to fight. Fight until you die. Felix had a gentle smile on his face, but his words were very cruel. Dean was relieved, but his expression was very gloomy. He grinned and said, "Aren't you afraid that I'll destroy your mecha? That you'll slaughter the mecha that you've worked so hard to cultivate? There's no need for waste to exist. Hosker only needs quality products." Felix's response was very simple. Dean looked at the young man in his 20s. The latter's cold-bloodedness was not inferior to the corrupt nobles and hunters in the Giant Wall. He didn't feel cold, but happy instead. If he wasn't so cold-blooded and cruel, then he wouldn't have dared to use such means to force him. Dean's expectations would be disappointed. "Since you're so confident, then let's see how powerful your bullshit mechas are," Dean said with an arrogant expression. Felix smiled and said, "Before the battle begins, we can clean up the place first. I will send someone to clean up Mr. Dean's excrement and food, so as to not affect our viewing experience. I hope Mr. Dean doesn't do anything stupid. If you kill the person who cleans up, no one will clean up for you anymore. You might be drowned in your own excrement in the future." Dean sneered, but didn't answer. A moment later, the other side of the passage suddenly split open, revealing a passage inside. A trembling cleaner stood in the passage, wearing antibacterial cleaning clothes with Hosker's logo. His face was full of nervousness and fear. Dean saw the man and suddenly rushed over. With a whoosh, he brushed past the man and came to the end of the passage behind him. He saw that it was blocked by a valve. He used the magic marks of the tortoise, and his arm turned into a stone sword. He cut the valve, but only made a shallow mark. Instead, he was bounced out. "It's useless, Mr. Dean. The material here is the same. You can't break it." Felix's voice came. Dean didn't give up and tried 2 more times, but it was still ineffective. He walked back with a gloomy face. "Only when Mr. Dean comes back will the inner valve close, and the second valve will open. So you won't have a chance to come out." Felix smiled and said to the cleaner, "Why aren't you cleaning? Do you want to stay inside with him?" The young cleaner was scared, and his body trembled. He slowly walked over, took out his tools, and cleaned the dirt on the ground. Dean looked at Felix coldly, ignoring the cleaner. After a moment, the room was cleaned, and the air was a lot fresher. The cleaner returned to the passage, and the valve closed. The pure silver room was like an oval cage, without any gap. "I need a set of clean clothes, tissues, and a urine bottle," Dean suddenly said to Felix in a cold voice. Felix was slightly startled, but nodded. "Okay." Soon, the things that Dean wanted were delivered by the cleaner. Dean put on new clothes and indifferently said, "Didn't you want to send your mecha over? Now it's ready." Felix smiled. "Don't worry. It's not time yet." Dean's heart moved. He sat down, closed his eyes, and rested. After a moment, Dean heard the sound of the valve opening. A giant, crocodile-like figure slowly climbed into the pure silver room. After it came in, the valve behind it closed. Chapter 1073. "Hey, this is..." Dean was a little surprised when he saw the scene inside the mech. It was not that the strange scene scared him, but through the blood vessels connected to the tentacles and the blood flow in the body of the blonde youth. He felt that the blonde youth seemed to have become a whole with the mech. Their blood was the same, and the nervous system was probably the same. At this moment, Felix's voice came from all directions in the room. "Magic fighting mech start." Dean turned his head and glanced at the viewing platform. He saw Felix and a few well-dressed people condescendingly watching here, as if they were watching a rare species in the zoo. Magic fighting mech? What a strange name. Dean frowned and turned his head, only to see a bloody mouth occupying all his line of sight. The mouth was half a man's length of ferocious fangs, extremely sharp, and a long scarlet tongue covered with fine barbs. Once bitten, it was estimated that even if he didn't die, he would lose a layer of skin. Whoosh! Dean quickly retreated, and yellow scales appeared all over his body. He suddenly jumped up and jumped on the back of the giant crocodile mech. He saw that its back was covered with smooth alloy scales. When Dean fell on its back, the alloy scales under his feet suddenly ejected, like sharp blades, and scratched Dean's legs. Fortunately, his legs were protected by the magic mark of the turtle, so they were not cut off, but it was a little painful. It could be imagined that if not for the magic mark, the sharp scales were enough to cut off his lower body. Go to hell. The blond youth inside the giant crocodile mech looked ferocious, and his eyes were slightly red. It seemed that he had suddenly become extremely tyrannical. Dean saw a row of rocket launchers similar to land missiles suddenly eject from the back of the giant crocodile mech. When this thing ejected, it was still preheated, and the missiles were launched in an instant. Bang, bang, bang. Several missiles were launched in succession. The interval was no more than 0.01 seconds. It was the first time for Dudian to see the hybrid attack combination of the monster and the mecha. He was surprised, but felt that it was quite interesting. He raised his arms, and the scales on his hands were completely petrified. Bang! The missile hit him, and the terrifying impact pushed his body to the wall behind him. There was a loud explosion. The pungent smell of gunpowder filled the air, and the ground was full of smoke and dust. The divine head crocodile mech is really powerful. It hasn't even used its power, but it's already beaten the demon race to the point where it can't even fight back. On the viewing platform, a well-dressed old man with a white beard clapped his hands and laughed. Beside him, a middle-aged man in his 40s chuckled. Looks like you're the same as me, betting on our mecha. This divine head crocodile mecha has been developed for more than 2 years, and it's close to perfection. It can perfectly connect the nerves of a demon warrior, and it's controlled by Luke. It'll be a piece of cake to defeat a lower abyssal demon, the white-bearded old man said with a smile. Felix smiled. I told Luke not to kill him so easily. This is just an appetizer. How can those guys be interested in betting if it's not exciting? At this time, the smoke in the room gradually dissipated. Several people looked down and found that there was no sound of fighting. The divine head crocodile mech was quietly lying in the same place. It seemed that it was waiting for an opportunity to move. Some people searched for Dean's figure in the smoke, but didn't see him. It wasn't until the smoke completely disappeared that everyone found out that Dean was on the back of the crocodile mecha. However, the crocodile mecha didn't make any response. What's going on? What's Luke doing? The white-bearded old man frowned. A strange light flashed in Felix's eyes. It seems he won. Dean, who was on the back of the divine head crocodile mech, looked up at Felix. There was a touch of a smile on his face. Dean jumped down from the back of the giant crocodile mech and drilled into the bottom of the mech. After a moment, he drilled out from the bottom of the mech with an unconscious figure in his hand. It was the operator of the mech, Luke. Thank you for the meal. Dudian smiled. Damn. The white-bearded old man was flustered and exasperated. What is Luke doing? How could he lose in such an inexplicable manner? Did he jerk off too much last night? Damn. How could the divine head crocodile mech lose? Someone was stunned. That damned Luke. I bet 5 million on him. Another middle-aged man was seething with killing intent, and his face was twisted with malevolence. Felix's eyes flashed. Interesting. Let the technical department analyze the situation inside and send it to everyone. Don't let them think that we're manipulating things behind the scenes. I'd like to see how the demons broke through our divine head crocodile mecha with the power of the lower abyss. President, I think we should execute Luke. Yes, he betrayed us. The white-bearded old man was the first to stand up. Felix glanced at them with an extremely indifferent look. It was as if he was looking at a few lowly worms in gorgeous clothes. He coldly snorted. Who can you blame if you bet on the wrong mech? Next time, keep your eyes open. Your loss is a small matter. If you can find the flaws of the divine head crocodile mech and improve it, then this loss is nothing. They didn't expect that the usually gentle Felix would change his face. But they knew that the young man was ruthless and not a good person. They immediately nodded, but there was some dissatisfaction in their hearts. They didn't lose money. Mr. Dean, the battle is over. Please hand over Luke and the mech. We'll send people to clean it up. I hope you can cooperate. Felix turned to Dean and said. Dean sneered. Since you have entered my territory, the things are mine. He didn't look back as he dragged Luke into the divine head crocodile mech. As soon as they entered the mech, Dean patted the blonde youth named Luke to wake him up. Luke saw that Dean was grabbing his shoulder. His face was pale with fright. He trembled. Why are you here? You haven't fully used the power of the mech, right? Dean's eyes were extremely cold. He didn't hide his killing intent. Can you use the ability of your magic marks through the mech? Luke's heart pounded wildly when he saw Dean's terrifying killing intent. He wanted to resist, but the hand on his shoulder squeezed his bones to the point of breaking them. Moreover, through the energy index detected on the mech, he knew that Dean was an existence of the Abyss level. He was naturally very clear about the hierarchy of the demon race. In front of Dean, his own combat power was like a baby in front of a strong man. He had no strength to speak of. Chapter 1074. Hearing his words, Dean knew that his guess was right. This mecha was a hybrid product of the monster's body and machinery. The role of these magic marks mecha operators was equivalent to the heart of this monster mecha. He seemed to see the original intention of Haas Company to develop these mecha. The powerful monsters were hunted in the dark areas outside the city. They retained a complete and powerful body, but had no consciousness. They were natural top-grade materials. Haas Company used them and transformed them into biological mecha, so that the body could exert more combat power than before. However, this combat power couldn't be controlled. For this reason, the company cultivated a group of Magic Marks warriors and filled them into the various monster mecha. They acted as the heart and brain of the monster mecha, so that the power of these monster mecha could be restored. Moreover, this power was controlled by the Magic Marks warriors, and the Magic Marks warriors were controlled by them. It was equivalent to them resurrecting these ferocious monsters and making them obey their orders. This was the layout of Haas Company and also the layout of Locke's consortium. They pursued power, so there must be a greater conspiracy and greed in their hearts. These thoughts flashed in Dean's mind. He had a deeper understanding of Hosker's company. He was sure that the Magic Marks Mecha project of Hosker's company had appeared a long time ago. Perhaps it had lasted for hundreds of years. After all, Haas Monster Mecha was very advanced. It was not something that could be improved in a short period of time. Now, they could even use the magic marks in the body of the Magic Marks warriors to use on the mecha. This was equivalent to these Magic Marks warriors were just parasitic soul worms buried in the body of the mecha. Every demonic mecha was a named demonic creature with a parasitic soul worm. They possessed extraordinary strength and were far stronger than ordinary demonic creatures. What kind of amazing discovery would be made if the technology contained in this is used in the research of undead? Dean's heart became hot and his eyes slightly brightened. The Federation is dominated by the 4 major consortiums. Locke's consortium studies monster mecha. The other consortiums should have other core business. It's impossible that the hidden industry behind them is the production of monster mecha. Maybe some consortiums mainly study undead. Thinking of this, he was even more excited. He couldn't wait to find the leaders of the 4 consortiums and interrogate them one by one. However, this was obviously unrealistic. After slightly restraining his excitement, he thought of a faster way to understand the core business of the 4 consortiums. For example, he could find out from Felix. The 4 consortiums were at odds with each other, so they naturally understood each other. As the branch president, Felix would definitely be satisfied with what he knew. Dean looked at Luke. He asked him about the other 3 consortiums with a tentative attitude. The result was beyond Dean's expectation. Luke actually knew about the situation of the other 3 consortiums. Moreover, there were consortiums that were studying the undead. Milan Financial Group, Terrace Financial Group, Michael Financial Group. Dean noted down the names of the 3 consortia. The Milan Consortium was mainly engaged in arms. Most of the arms used by the military and the border were provided by the Milan Consortium. The Michael Consortium was good at business. They had land and shops in every city of the Federation. Their business covered all walks of life. In addition, they were also involved in the field of mecha and arms. Although they weren't as monopolistic as the Locke and Milan consortium, they still occupied the second share of the market. The Terrace consortium was the most mysterious of the four consortiums. Most of the famous scientists in the Federation were gathered in the Terrace consortium. Most of the emerging technologies were promoted by the Terrace consortium. Locke's mecha had many parts that relied on the Terrace consortium's factories. They couldn't be produced by themselves and could only be purchased. In addition, many of the core parts of the thermal weapons of the Milan consortium came from the Terrace consortium's factories. In addition, the Terrace consortium was trying to develop an antidote to the undead virus infection. It had been announced for a long time, but there was no antidote. It was still in the process of research and development. Nevertheless, the Terrace consortium still gave the Federation civilians great hope. It was also the most prestigious consortium among the four consortiums. If there's an opportunity, I have to go to the Terrace consortium. Dean had the urge to leave, but if he left rashly, he would immediately become a wanted criminal of the Federation. It would be even more difficult to enter the Terrace consortium. I've told you everything you asked. Can you let me go now? Luke asked cautiously as he saw Dean was silent. Dean glanced at him. You can leave if you want. Give me the map of this place, the area of each floor, the rooms, entrances, exits, emergency passageways, and the distribution of guards. In addition, tell me the tricks of operating this mecha. Luke was flabbergasted. He hurriedly said, This is all confidential information. It cannot be leaked. Secrets? Dean's arm petrified and turned into a stone sword. He put on Luke's neck. There was a questioning look in his eyes. Luke's face stiffened, and he said embarrassedly, My lord, you're one of us, so telling you won't be considered a leak. However, if I tell you everything, will you really let me go? I have no enmity with you, and I'm only here to fight you under orders. Cut the crap. I'll let you go as long as you don't play tricks. Dean sneered. Luke breathed a sigh of relief and immediately told him the information that Dudian wanted. Mr. Dean, if you insist on not cooperating, then we will stop the food supply for the next week. Felix's voice came from outside the mecha. Dean turned a deaf ear to him and let Luke continue to whisper. President, what does this kid want to do? Did he really eat Luke? The white-bearded old man was surprised. Another middle-aged man frowned and said, I think he is trying to control the divine crocodile Mechhumph. He thinks he can operate it just because he is a demon warrior. He doesn't know that every mech needs assistance to complete the connection. What kind of power do you think a demon from the abyss will display if he controls the divine head crocodile mecha? Someone asked curiously. The white-bearded old man shook his head. It's useless. The pioneers have already met the supply of the divine head crocodile mecha. If it was the demon or the abyss, they would still display the same level of power. After all, the limit of the divine head crocodile mecha is there. I see. The person who asked the question was resentful. Although he was a high-level official, he didn't pay much attention to these things. As Felix listened to their conversation, his brows furrowed imperceptibly, and the disgust in his heart grew stronger. These people had gotten to their positions through connections. Not only were their abilities average, but they were also too lazy to understand the things in their hands. This was already a problem with their attitude. However, if it was not necessary, he could not be bothered to question them. After all, these people only asked for the salary of their positions and not to do anything, which made things convenient for him. Go to the monitoring room and pull up the image inside. Felix saw that Dean didn't respond, so his face turned cold and he left. They went down to the monitoring room and asked the technician to pull up the image inside the divine head crocodile mecha. They saw Dean and Luke sitting in the command room of the divine head crocodile mecha, which was the ventricle of the divine head crocodile mecha. Dean was holding several connected pipes in his hand. He looked up and down as if he was studying it. Sometimes he petrified his arm into a sword and pierced it into the mecha to see the internal structure. Sure enough, he is studying the mecha. Felix slightly narrowed his eyes. This kid thinks he can learn how to operate the mecha like this? He is too naive. The white-bearded old man couldn't help but sneer. This kid is disobedient. We should give him a taste of suffering. Otherwise, no one will be willing to go in and fight. Another person said. Chapter 1075. Dean visited the interior of the magic crocodile for a while. He felt that it was roughly the same as what he had seen with his X-ray vision. There was no secret in his eyes. He felt that if he had the corresponding mechanical parts and a little more time, he could complete the assembly. He could even transform a living monster into a hybrid-mechanical mecha. If such a mecha appeared in the giant wall, it would be enough to create a terrifying army. Dean thought. He suddenly remembered that when the Federation attacked the War God's Wall, in addition to the mecha, the vanguard was a large number of monsters. Those monsters were real monsters. It seemed that the Federation should have some means to drive these monsters, and there should be some connection with this magic crocodile mecha. Sir, Luke's legs were trembling. He looked at Dean and wanted to cry, but had no tears. Dean glanced at him and saw that he had asked all the questions. The latter was honest and didn't lie about the information. The description of the buildings on each floor was similar to what he had seen with his X-ray vision. Moreover, he also confessed that in addition to him, there was another real demon in the abyss. "You can leave," Dean said. He suddenly changed the topic. "But before you leave, say a few words to curse Felix. The more vicious, the better. It's best to harm your family." Luke was stunned. Curse President Felix? Yes. Why? Luke was at a loss. Dean was speechless. This Westerner's brain was a bit straight. "Don't worry so much. After we leave, if anyone asks what we're doing inside, just say that we're studying the mecha and want to operate the mecha to escape from here. As for anything else, don't say a word." Although Luke's reaction was slow, he immediately came to his senses after hearing Dean's words. Dean was forcibly tying him to the same boat. Once he responded to Dean's strange questions, Dean would also bring out the words he cursed at Felix. Even if Felix knew that he was being forced, but it was a fact that he cursed Felix, and there would be no good fruit to eat in the future. "However, even if I curse here, no one will know." Luke could not help but heave a sigh of relief. At this time, Dean suddenly chiseled a bloody hole in the cockpit of the magic crocodile. He drilled into the hole and found a huge loudspeaker. Behind the loudspeaker were several palm-sized trumpets. Dean dismantled the trumpets. In front of Luke's puzzled eyes, he dismantled the wires and energy blocks. A moment later, a chic recorder was assembled by Dean. "Hello, hello." Dean tried. The tape recorder also made a hello, hello sound. Luke's jaw dropped and his eyes widened. "You can say it." Dean looked at Luke. How did you do it?" Luke looked at Dean as if he had seen a ghost. The shock in his heart was extreme. In his eyes, the bloodthirsty and ferocious demons naturally made people feel that the civilization was low and barbaric. But Dean used the roaring speaker in the mecha to assemble a recorder. Even a student of the Federation University would find it difficult to do this. "It's not difficult, just a little modification," Dean said casually. In addition to the restoration of the magic crocodile's throat, there was also a huge loudspeaker installed in the body of the magic crocodile, which recorded the voices of all kinds of fierce monsters. The purpose might be to intimidate other real monsters. He only needed a little modification to be able to use it as a recorder. Luke was stunned for a moment, somewhat speechless. Under Dean's intense gaze, he could only bite the bullet and curse a few times at Felix. Not ruthless enough, such as the death of the whole family, the bankruptcy of the Locke Consortium, and so on, Dean said. Luke's mouth twitched. If he really said that, once the recording was exposed, he would absolutely die without a burial place. Even if Felix could tolerate him, the Locke Consortium would not allow him to live in this world. "Can you change it?" "No, I really can't say that." "Okay." A moment later, Luke's voice was played from the recorder, cursing the Locke Consortium and Felix. Dean listened to the original words and nodded with satisfaction. "You can leave." Luke covered his red and swollen face and looked at Dean with resentment. He turned around and hurried out of the magic crocodile to call for help. Soon, Felix sent people to pick up Luke and sent 2 moving armors to drag the magic crocodile away from the ground. He also sent a lot of people to clean up the scene. Throughout the whole process, one of the 2 valves was always closed, so Dean couldn't take the opportunity to leave. Mr. Dean, since you didn't cooperate, I can only give you a taste of bitterness. I hope we can have a pleasant cooperation next time. Felix looked down at Dean with a subtle smile on his face, and then turned to leave. Then Dean suddenly felt a pungent smell spray out from all around the room, like a faint fog, enveloping the whole room. The smell was full of rancid, feces, and fishy. It was disgusting. Dean frowned slightly. Although he expected Felix to punish him, he didn't expect it to be such a child's play. But in order to prevent the other party from further excessive actions, he pretended to be very uncomfortable, covered his nose, and curled up on the ground. In the following days, Dean found that no more food was put in, and the pungent smell was taken back after a day, sucked away through the vent. Obviously, they knew that although the smell was unpleasant, it wouldn't have much lethality after a long time. At night, a strange harsh sound suddenly rang in the pure silver room, making Dean unable to sleep. Dean suddenly felt that the person who designed this cage was a bit childish. Could this be considered a punishment? He didn't sleep all night and only fell asleep the next day when the sound disappeared. But as soon as he fell asleep, the harsh sound rang again. Dean didn't feel irritated when he woke up. Instead, he was a bit surprised. He didn't expect that the other party could not only monitor him, but also detect his physical state. I don't know what I told Luke before. Do they know? Dean's thoughts turned to this, and then he thought that the next time they sent someone in, he could catch that person and ask if Luke was okay. He continued to lie on the ground, closed his eyes, and pretended to sleep. But the harsh sound didn't continue to ring. Dean suddenly understood. It seemed that this instrument detected whether he was sleeping or not through his physical state, and it looked quite high-end. Chapter 1076. It sounded complicated to wake up the body and make the consciousness dormant, but it was very simple to do. Dean closed his eyes and calmed his thoughts. He stood up from the ground and slowly lifted one foot to stand on one foot. After the posture stabilized, his consciousness slowly entered sleep. Soon he fell asleep, but his body still maintained the posture of standing on one foot. In order to maintain the balance of one foot, his body instinctively maintained a slight state of tension. This sleep was very comfortable. When Dean opened his eyes, he still didn't hear the harsh sound. He couldn't help but smile. It seemed that the detection device wasn't that high-end. He sat down and rubbed his feet to eliminate fatigue. He recalled the previous body structure of the magic crocodile and the structure of the huge mecha he saw in the workshops along the way. At that time, he used his X-ray vision to scan the inside of the mecha and noted it down. At this moment, he compared it with a magic crocodile and found that the difference was not big. They were both semi-biological mecha. One more fight, and then I can leave, Dudian said in his heart. In the blink of an eye, 7 days passed. There was no food, and from time to time, there was a pungent smell. Every time he slept, there would be harsh sounds. These punishments all stopped on the 8th day. A large piece of bloody beef was dropped from the food pipe. Dean leaned against the wall and heard the sound from above. He knew that food was coming. He got up and opened the valve. He took out the beef, took a big bite, and swallowed it. It seems that I can leave soon. Dean bit the beef as he thought. After eating, he lay down to sleep. He found that the harsh sounds were really gone. He knew that the fight would start tomorrow. As he expected, the next day, Dean saw Felix standing on the viewing platform. Felix smiled when he saw him wake up. Mr. Dean, have you had a good rest these days? Dean smiled. I slept very comfortably. Felix smiled. That's good. This time we will send a newly developed mecha to fight with you. If you do the same as last time, then the punishment will be doubled. Dean laughed. If one comes, I'll kill one. The smile on Felix's face slowly disappeared. He indifferently said, In that case, I'll wait and see. This devil brat is too savage. The white-bearded old man said angrily. He was very angry with Dudian. Last time he had lost a lot of money because of Dudian. He's just showing off his eloquence. Felix's temperament was still very gentlemanly and elegant. He said indifferently, "Send 2 of you this time. It'll make our match a little more exciting and give him a taste of his own medicine." 2. Someone beside him was shocked. "Won't that be too difficult? What if we kill him? Kill him. His corpse is still valuable." A middle-aged man in a white suit said with a smile. There was a smell of medicine on his body. At this moment, when he said this, the expressions of the people beside him changed slightly. They subconsciously stood a little further away from him. "Go get ready," Felix ordered. Seeing that he had already made up his mind, they didn't dare to persuade him anymore and immediately left. Dean leaned against the wall, looking forward to the fight. After a moment, a slight tremor came from the passage behind the valve. Dean's eyes lit up as he knew that the prey had come. The passage opened, and 2 huge mechas came out. Dean was a little surprised and couldn't help but chuckle. It seemed that Felix was angered by him and wanted to teach him a lesson. It really saved him a lot of trouble. One of the 2 demonic mechas was a 12 to 13 meters tall snow-white ape. Its whole body was covered with needle-like snow-white hair. The muscles on its chest were inlaid with dark silver metal. There were 2 rocket launchers on its back. When it crawled on the ground, the rocket launchers on its back could be launched, or it could stand and shoot at the enemy in the sky. In addition, in its hands, there were actually 2 huge metal swords. The appearance of the other demonic mecha was very familiar. It was very similar to the dragon in Chinese mythology. But if you look closely, you would find that the claws under the dragon's abdomen were all inlaid with metal. Most of the scales on its body were metallic in color. There was an eye on its forehead, but if you looked closely, you would find that it was made of alloy material. The eyeball was empty. Dean used his X-ray vision to scan in depth and found that there was a laser emitter in the dragon's forehead. Obviously, it could be ejected from its forehead. Is the person who designed this mecha from China? He forcibly installed 4 claws on the python and added flaws to it. Dean thought, with his X-ray vision, he could indeed see the flaws of these mechas, and they were very obvious. After all, his vision was extremely high, and he had seen real and ferocious monsters. These mechas were all designed. The designer definitely didn't have such rich combat experience and understanding of power as he did. The laser on the forehead of this dragon can hurt me. The sword in the hands of this snow ape, although hard, isn't polished enough. It's much thicker than my splitting blade. Dean glanced at the 2 mechas and understood the result. He thought about it and didn't directly attack them from their flaws. Although this would shock Felix and the others, it would be useless. Instead, it would add to his troubles and cause variables to appear in his prison break. It's time to perform again. Dean sighed softly in his heart and took the initiative to rush toward the giant ape mecha. The giant ape mecha roared, full of momentum, like a living monster. It waved its dual swords and swept toward Dean, the back of the swords waving like a tiger. Dean entered the tortoiseshell's body and was hit and sent flying. Good. The white-bearded old man and the others behind the screen couldn't help but applaud. This time, they had planned to bet on Dean, but Felix had sent out 2 mechas at once, so they directly bet on the mecha side. At this moment, seeing Dean sent flying, they couldn't help but cheer. Dean had just climbed up when the dragon rushed over. It was full of momentum, but its speed was a bit slow. Dean couldn't help but sigh. If it didn't have those 4 hindering metal claws, it was estimated that its speed could be doubled. He didn't move. When the dragon approached, he resisted and turned over to ride on the dragon. The scales on the back of the dragon suddenly ejected. The metal scales were like scattered bullets, cutting him. Chapter 1077. This kid can't hold on any longer. The white-bearded old man laughed. After all, it's the divine monkey and the dragon mecha. They're stronger than the divine crocodile mecha. Even the middle abyss would have to kneel before the joint attack of the 2 mechas, someone said with certainty and confidence. In the pure silver room, Dean was indeed at a disadvantage. He was forced by the two mechas and was injured from time to time. It seemed that he couldn't hold on any longer. However, after 7 or 8 minutes, Dean was always able to find a loophole in the encirclement of the two mechas and reverse the disadvantage a little. It was very exciting to watch. They're strong, but they don't cooperate well enough. Otherwise, this kid would have died. The white-bearded old man saw that the situation was in a deadlock and looked worried. Someone next to him laughed. The longer he drags on, the more tacit they will be. This kid will lose. This time, I'm betting double. If he wins, he'll earn back all the losses from last time. In the room, Dean estimated the time and felt that the performance was almost over. With the eyesight of ordinary people like Felix, they couldn't understand the subtleties. It was almost impossible for them to capture the details of his battle with their naked eyes. If it was another Abyss, they could see through his performance at a glance. After all, even he felt that his performance was fake. The counterattack started from the dragon mecha. Dean knocked away one of the mecha's metal claws. Although the claws were embedded firmly, they didn't grow naturally. He directly broke it, revealing the gap inside. Dean immediately drilled into it. What's going on? The white-bearded old man and the others in front of the screen were a little surprised to see the sudden counterattack. It seemed that the dragon mecha had made a mistake. It actually allowed Dean to break one of the claws and drill into the mecha. Felix's face darkened. Get the divine monkey mecha ready. If the dragon is in danger or out of control, kill it immediately. At this moment, the dragon mecha suddenly stopped moving. At the same time, a figure jumped out of the dragon mecha's mouth, pounced on the divine monkey mecha, and drilled into its ear. The divine monkey mecha wanted to dig Dean out, but it didn't take long before its body fell to the ground. The victory and defeat were over in the blink of an eye. There was no fierce duel. The screen became strange and quiet. Looking at the unmoving image, Felix's expression turned ugly. He shouted, "Use the thermal conductivity meter to check the situation inside. See if the mecha operator is still alive." Soon, the technician called up the situation inside the two mechas. The mecha operator in the Flood Dragon mecha was unconscious, while the mecha operator in the Monkey mecha was held by Dean by the neck. His body had been separated from the mecha. The white-bearded old man and the others widened their eyes. Their faces turned pale as if they were the people mentioned by Dean. This time, the winning rate of the mecha was too high. They had bet too much, but now it seemed that they had lost everything. Dean was holding the sturdy mecha. "Do you know Luke? Where is he now?" The brawny man looked at Dean in horror. He knew that Dean was a real demon, cruel and bloodthirsty. It was said that demons even eat human flesh. He did not expect that he would face such a terrible existence. Without the protection of the mech, he felt like a girl who had lost her clothes, without any cover. "I know. Luke lost the last time he fought you," the brawny man said in a trembling voice. "I mean, where is he now?" Duddy and frowned. After he lost, he's been in the training room every day. Why is he in the training room? Is it Felix's order? No. Someone probably laughed at him, saying that he lost to a lower-level demon with the divine crocodile mecha. He was too ashamed to see anyone, so he hid in the training room. Dean was relieved. It seemed that Felix and the others could not hear his conversation. At most, they could only see his image. Thinking of this, he immediately began to interrogate the brawny man. "Map of the Federation? I don't know. Food supply for the factory? I don't care about these things." After a moment, Dean asked all the questions he wanted to know. Looking at the cowering brawny man, he said in a cold voice, "I'm going to interrogate the one in the dragon now. If your answer is different from what she said..." "Huh?" The brawny man panicked and quickly said, "I don't know the map of the Federation, but I know the map of Copper Ship City. Every city uses fighter planes to transport resources, and there are monsters wreaking havoc outside the city." He answered some of Dean's previous questions again. When he was done, Dean turned around and left. He went to the dragon mecha. The mecha operator inside was a mature woman with a plump figure. She had been knocked out by him and had yet to wake up. He patted the woman to wake up. First, he threatened her, then continued to interrogate her. "Mr. Dean, I'll give you another chance. Let them out." Felix's voice came from outside the mech. Hearing this, the plump woman could not help but look at Dean expectantly, but Dean responded with an indifferent expression. "Don't bother. Continue." When the two finished, Dean took out a recorder and let them curse Felix, the Lock Consortium, and the Federation's most noble god of science and technology, just like Luke had done. After cursing the 4 consortiums and the god of science and technology one by one, Dean let them go. Walking out of the mech, he said to the angry Felix, "Take them out." Felix took a deep breath and said with a smile, "Very well." Soon, robots came in from the passage to transport the mechs away, and cleaning machines came in to clean the site. When everything was cleaned up, the passage was closed again. Felix raised his hand and waved. The staff who had been waiting immediately activated the mechanism. Suddenly, a sound wave of a strange frequency came from the pure silver room, piercing into the mind like a magic sound. The sound was not loud, but it was very sharp. Dean frowned slightly. Was this an overclocked sound wave attack? He immediately petrified his ears and shrank all the pores on his body to block out the sound wave. At the same time, he covered his head with his hands and squatted on the ground, pretending to be in pain. "You reap what you sow." Felix saw this scene, snorted coldly, and turned to leave. The overclocked sound wave attack continued into the night. The pure silver room was as bright as day, and it was impossible to distinguish day from night. But Dean could tell by the biological clock in his body that it was night around 8 or 9 o'clock. He waited for another 3 hours. It was already early in the morning, and the night was quiet. "Felix, I'm coming." A ray of light flashed in Dean's dark eyes. His whole body suddenly demonized, and he entered Splitter's demonic body. Sharp blades protruded from his body, and his whole body was like a monster exuding a tyrannical aura. Terrifying blades danced in the air. He rushed to a wall, and suddenly swung his body, smashing the splitter tail on his back into the wall. Puff! The wall cracked, and a wound was cut open. Chapter 1078. Dean pulled out the tail blade from the wall. Several blades on his shoulders and back quickly pierced into the wall next to the gap. The angle of each blade was either parallel or perpendicular. In the blink of an eye, several holes were pierced and long cracks appeared on the wall. Dean retracted the blades that extended from his arms and punched the holes in the wall. Bang! The wall caved in. It was a metal alloy wall panel. "I don't know if my splitting blade can cut the alloy material." Dean looked at the alloy wall. His eyes moved. Previously, he had attacked the exhaust seam on the wall. In his eyes, the wall was like a grid. If the sharp blade could accurately fall into each grid line, then even if he used the petrified tortoiseshell's blade, he could still break the wall. Whoosh! Dean swung the tail blade and swept the wall next to him. Dean felt a fierce impact and slight pain. He felt that the tail blade had fallen into a hard thing. However, the alloy wall panel was torn and the tail blade was stuck inside. 30 centimeters thick. Dean visually measured the edge of the alloy wall panel. If the thickness could reach 1 meter, perhaps even his splitting blade couldn't pierce it. Without stopping, Dean drilled into the alloy wall panel. The splitting blade suddenly changed. Yellow scales appeared on his skin. His whole body was petrified. He drilled into the dark interlayer of the wall panel. There were wires and pipes everywhere. His petrified arms were almost insulated. There was no blood flow in his arms. The blood in his body was changed by the tortoiseshell factor and turned into a strange particle. However, the core of his brain was still flesh and blood. Once it was completely petrified, he would stop thinking, although the body would remain petrified forever, almost immortal, but he would always turn into a stone sculpture. Dean rudely destroyed the wires containing strong voltage to avoid getting close to his brain. Although the outside of his skull was petrified and insulated, the voltage in the wires was too high. If it was close to his brain, it was possible that the electric current would reach deep into his brain. These circuits were equivalent to the cage's second line of defense. Once someone destroyed the walls with brute force, the circuits would also be destroyed. Since the room was made entirely of metal, the electric current would instantly permeate the entire room and kill the person inside. Dean's actions were just right. At the moment, he turned into a turtle monster. While destroying the lines, he crawled out. Soon he reached the wall behind the lines. The material of the wall couldn't be seen through. He cleared the lines around him. His body remained petrified, but his arms turned into Splitter's blade. He slashed at the wall. An ear-piercing sound of metal being cut rang out. The arm pierced through the wall, but it was also stuck inside. He pulled it out forcefully and slashed again. For 5 times in a row, he forcefully broke a hole in the wall. He looked outside. Beyond the wall was the corridor outside the cage. Dean didn't stop. He jumped out of the hole and glanced around. The map of the entire factory appeared in his mind. He combined it with the terrain he remembered when he came in and quickly rushed to the left. He had just run less than 100 meters when the alarm in the basement suddenly sounded. The harsh siren made Dean's eyes filled with killing intent. He didn't stop. According to the perfect map in his mind, he quickly rushed to the east of this floor. Just after turning 2 corners, a fierce giant beast suddenly jumped out from the 3rd corner. It was 14 or 15 meters long, like a poisonous lizard, and its whole body was covered with colorful lumps. It opened its bloody mouth and bit at Dean. Dean seemed to have expected it. His body petrified, and several splitter blades ejected from his back and shoulders. They danced quickly. Dean rushed out from the top of the bloody mouth. His body was stained with blood. He landed on the back of the lizard mech. Stepping on the smooth metal scales, he quickly rushed back, as if he was desperately escaping. The operator of the lizard mech was dumbfounded. He didn't expect that his best mech would be directly torn by Dean in the case of sneak attack. He controlled the mech to turn around, but saw that Dean's back had disappeared. It was too late to chase him. Although the mech could still fight without its head, its combat ability was greatly weakened. Many circuits in its head were destroyed, making some weapon systems unable to start. This is the devil who fought with Luke and the others. Whoosh! In the blink of an eye, Dean rushed to the east side of the factory. A figure appeared in his golden eyes. His eyes slightly narrowed, and his tyrannical aura became stronger. He was like a beast crawling and jumping. In the blink of an eye, he rushed to the front of a suspended room built on a metal frame. There were a few coffee tables outside, and the floor was made of wood. There were also a few pots of flowers next to it. It was very comfortable to dress up in the room. Dean kicked the door open, and a harsh alarm sounded at the door. His tail blade pierced through the door, and the alarm stopped abruptly. Bang! A scorching light beam suddenly shot over. Dean tilted his head slightly and dodged it. The room was dark. Felix had already woken up when he rushed over. As he kicked the door open, he climbed out of bed, but he didn't turn on the lights. Instead, he reached for a laser gun next to the bed and shot at the door. This kind of adaptability was extremely outstanding for an ordinary person. However, with his night vision, he could see all of Felix's movements clearly. He easily dodged the bullet's trajectory. Dean didn't approach slowly like a cat playing with a mouse. Instead, he flashed in front of Felix in an instant. The black mucus on his knife-like arm faded, revealing his pale arm. He grabbed the back of Felix's neck with one hand and lifted him off the bed. At the same time, a sharp blade rolled on his shoulder. With a cold flash, the gun in Felix's hand fell, and so did the hand that held the gun. It was cut off at the wrist. Felix, who had always been smiling and elegant, suddenly screamed. At this moment, there was no longer the slightest bit of calmness on the young man. His hair, which had been a little messy due to sleep, coupled with his screams, looked a little hysterical and embarrassed. Dean untied the magic splitter on his body, and green scales suddenly grew on one of his arms. This was another of his poison magic marks, and it had hallucinogenic and paralyzing effects. His fingernails gently scratched Felix's wound. Felix immediately felt a cool sensation on his broken wrist, and the burning pain actually disappeared. He opened his mouth and froze for a moment before he reacted. He turned to look at Dean, and his face became extremely ugly. "What do you want? Aren't you curious how I got out?" Dean's pale golden eyes looked a little demonic in the darkness. "Curiosity won't help. You kidnapped me. Do you want to use me as a hostage to let you leave?" Felix took a deep breath and said, "If that's the case, then I promise you that I won't announce your information. You can leave here and no one will know. I'll also help you fix the identity verification loophole that was exposed when you sneaked into the military. You can mix in the Federation and no one will know of your existence." It's really easy to talk to a smart person. Dean felt that relieving the pain in his arm was the right choice. He smiled and said, "But I don't want to leave for the time being. The environment here is good, and I like it." Felix couldn't help but be stunned. His eyelids gently twitched as he said, "I know that I was rude to you before, and I hope you don't take offense. I think my attitude is pretty good. If you have any needs, we can discuss it. Killing me won't do you any good. I'm not threatening you. I just want to say that keeping me alive can meet more of your needs." Chapter 1079. Felix's mouth twitched slightly as he listened to the loud alarm outside. He knew that if he did as Dean said and dismissed the guards who were alarmed by the alarm, he would really fall into the palm of Dean's hand. Who knew how this bloodthirsty demon would treat him? He would never believe that Dean wouldn't retaliate. However, in the current situation, he had no choice but to be obedient. Felix's brain worked extremely fast to think of a way to escape, but under Dean's coercive gaze, how could he come up with any ideas in just a few seconds? He could only nod and say, "I know. I'll let them turn off the alarm and go rest." Dean smiled gently and said, "Wouldn't that let them know that you've been kidnapped by me? Moreover, my whereabouts can be seen from the surveillance. They will immediately investigate the surveillance and know that I'm here. Do you think they will surround this place and try to rescue you? Then I'll accidentally kill you in the process of their rescue?" Felix suddenly felt a chill down his spine and cold sweat appeared. He asked, "Then how should I say it? You should understand." Dean's expression was indifferent. "Now is the time to test whether you're obedient or not. Your performance will determine whether I let you live or die. If you want to live, you only need to pay your loyalty." Loyalty? Felix heard this word. In his mind, this word had always had a derogatory meaning. A knight's loyalty to a noble was loyalty, while a subordinate's loyalty to a king was loyalty. Without exception, those who gained and gave their loyalty would always have a superior and subordinate relationship. Because of this, he had never been loyal to anyone. It was because he had never placed anyone else in his eyes. Even those with illustrious statuses, in his eyes, were just stepping stones that he would surpass sooner or later. "I know." Felix felt as if his voice was squeezed out of his throat. He took a deep breath and seemed to have made a difficult decision. He said, "I'll let all the 3-star and below mecha operators return to their posts, and let 2 4-star mecha operators come to rescue me. This way, the others will also be relieved of their concerns. Then, when the 2 5-star mecha operators come over with their mechas, you can take me as a hostage and force them to stop attacking. Then, you can take the opportunity to defeat or kill them. After that, I'll announce that you've perished together with the mecha operators. This way, your existence will be invisible and no one will notice you." Dean's eyes lit up as he heard Felix's words. He nodded slightly. Yes, they are coming. Felix was relieved to see Dean agree. He sneered in his heart and immediately cooperated with Dean. Both of them went out of the room. Felix was held hostage by Dean as he gave instructions. Immediately, a factory security supervisor stood behind a few mechas and shouted, "President, don't compromise. We will immediately find a way to rescue you. This demon will definitely not escape." Felix almost blew his top when he heard that. He said in exasperation, "Compromise my ass. Letting so many people surround me and cause trouble. Are you trying to get me killed? If you don't do as I say, I'll fire you immediately." The supervisor was shocked and didn't dare to hesitate anymore. He quickly gave instructions. Although with his experience as a guard, this approach was very unwise. Felix was in the hands of the demon, so he had no choice but to compromise. Soon, the surrounding mechas gradually retreated. Before long, Dean saw 2 mechas rushing over. In the mechas sat 2 Dominator-level pilots. Obviously, these 2 were the 4-star mecha operators here. Dean took a deep breath. From Luke and the other 2, he learned that the strongest mecha operators cultivated in this factory were 4-star, and their combat power was enough to rival the Lord of the Abyss of the demon race. Haas Company also had 5-star mecha operators, but in the headquarters, their strength was comparable to the King's. Of course, this was Luke's concept. In fact, they hadn't fought against the kings of the Empire, but only analyzed and compared from the data. Let them go to the first floor, Dean said to Felix in a cold voice. Felix was startled, and his heart suddenly turned cold. He knew what Dean was thinking. He originally planned to use the hands of these 2 4-star mecha operators to get rid of Dean, but he didn't expect that Dean wanted to take him directly away from here. Once they left, with the pursuit of the 2 4-star mecha operators, Dean would obviously throw away this burden. It was very likely that he would be killed casually. While Felix's face was cloudy, Dean's fingers touched the back of his neck. His sharp nails cut through the skin, and Felix shivered. He gritted his teeth and passed on Dean's words. The others watched helplessly as Dean took Felix away. After reaching the first floor, Dean proposed to go to the ground. Felix had expected this, so he could only do as he was told. After going to the ground, sure enough, Dean grabbed Felix and ran away. "Save me," Felix shouted in a hurry. The 2 mechas immediately chased after him, extremely fast. However, Dean stimulated the splitter magic body, and the blade-like wings behind him flapped. His speed was no slower than the mechas, and in the blink of an eye, he was hundreds of miles away from the factory. Dean ran all the way to the wilderness. Felix, who was in his hand, had already been knocked unconscious by the strong wind during his sprint. When he reached a basin, Dean put Felix on the ground. He wanted to directly throw him down, but he was afraid that Felix's bones were weak and he would directly fall to his death. After putting Felix down, Dean quickly turned back. A red gem appeared on his forehead, like a demonic eye. Heat gathered, and suddenly a ray flew out from his forehead, hitting the chest of one of the mechas. With a bang, the chest of the mecha was shot through, but in front of the place where the pilot was sitting, there was a metal plate blocking the ray. Dean frowned and sighed in his heart. It was nighttime, and there was no sunlight. The effect of his Sun Beast's ray attack was less than 30% of the usual, and it actually couldn't kill the pilot in the mecha. It's too exhausting to force it. Such a thought flashed in Dean's mind. He turned around, lifted Felix, and slapped him awake. Looking at the bewildered Felix, he quickly lifted him up and said, "Tell them to stop attacking." Felix's brain was buzzing, but after being lifted up by Dean, the cold wind blew, and he immediately woke up. This won't do." Felix's face was pale, and he no longer maintained his gentlemanly demeanor. Dean said in a cold voice, "If you don't talk, then die." His nails pierced into Felix's flesh. In the end, Felix was, after all, the second generation of a rich family. Although he had an excellent education since childhood and had seen many bloody experiments, he himself had not suffered much. At this moment, he was in so much pain that he wanted to die from Dean's nails. He quickly said, I'll talk. After that, he immediately shouted out Dean's words. The 2 mechas rushed in front of Dean and stopped when they heard the words. Looking at Felix in Dean's hand, the 2 mecha operators inside the mecha hesitated. Chapter 1080. Felix was so scared that his face turned pale. He hurriedly persuaded, "Stop. I order you to stop attacking." The 2 mechas stopped in place, seeming to be in a dilemma. Dean whispered to Felix, "Tell one of them to come down and negotiate with me." Felix immediately knew what Dean was thinking. He was extremely anxious, but he could only bite the bullet and say, "He wants one of you to come down and talk to him. The one in the ghost shift mecha, you come down." The mecha on the left was like a Buddha, but its whole body was made of black metal. There were several giant claws on its body, and it was very ferocious. Its back was high, and there seemed to be whiskers fluttering on it. It was like a ghost. Hearing Felix's order, the face of the pilot sitting inside changed slightly, but he didn't act immediately. After a moment of silence, he suddenly used the communicator to quickly say a few words to the pilot on the right. Dean saw this scene with his X-ray vision and knew that it was not good. Sure enough, the strange Buddha-like ghost shift mecha on the left slowly walked over. It didn't seem to have any malice, but a vertical pupil suddenly split open on its forehead, and a laser shot out from it. The laser was very thick, enough to completely envelop Dean. The moment Dean saw the vertical pupil split open, he suddenly pulled back. Bang! The laser penetrated the ground in front of him. Felix was stunned, and then he jumped in anger. "What are you doing?" The two mechas didn't respond. They quickly rushed over and flanked Dean. Dean's face darkened. He guessed what the two mecha were thinking. Things suddenly became a bit tricky. He took a deep breath and threw Felix to a big tree behind him. His whole body was covered in raging flames, and the sharp blades on his body were as red as soldering iron. The black splitter turned into a bright red burning splitter. The magic mark ability of the Sun Beast was integrated into the splitter, and the surging power made him feel as if he could destroy the world with a wave of his hand. However, his heartbeat also beat violently at this moment, making him feel a tearing pain. Finish this quickly. Dean's eyes were terrifyingly cold. The burning wings suddenly flapped, and he fell into the night sky like a fireball. The ghost shift mecha's forehead immediately shot out a laser beam. The interval was extremely short, not even half a second. Dean's body swayed up and down, dodging the laser shot. Although the speed of the laser was extremely fast, making it difficult for him to react, he saw the hidden laser charging device behind the vertical pupil through his X-ray vision. Whenever the charging was about to be completed, he quickly adjusted the direction so that the mecha had no time to change direction. In less than 2 seconds, Dean was in front of the ghost transformation mech. Facing him were 4 strange arms. These arms grew from the armpits of the Buddha. The arms were covered with extremely long hair, and the nails were sharp like claws. The skin was blue, and the hands were holding a hammer, knife, sword, and shield. At this moment, the hammer and knife were swung down, the shield was in front of him, and the sword was raised from below. "Great!" Dean roared. He felt his heart contract fiercely, and the pain came. He didn't care about reducing his strength. The flames on the sharp blades scattered out, turning into fire shadows that obscured the mecha's sight. At the same time, he dodged the giant hammer and rushed to the side of the giant knife. The tail blade swung, and with a bang, the knife was cut off. Dean crossed the knife and rushed to the shield inside. The sharp blades suddenly gathered and turned into a cone-shaped spiral blade in front of him. With a bang, the giant shield was drilled a hole. Dean's wings flapped rapidly, and he pushed his body again, like a burning firebird, breaking into the chest of the mecha. Plop! The mecha crashed to the ground. Dean drilled out from behind the mecha. Before he had time to breathe, he felt a tingling sense of danger. He hurriedly dodged. He didn't look back, but he had seen clearly that it was a laser shot from the eyes of another mecha that looked like a nine-tailed fox. This laser attack was extremely powerful, and it seemed that every mecha was equipped with it. At this moment, the nine-tailed fox mecha quickly rushed toward Dean, its 9 tails flashing, shooting out a large number of silver metal needles. Dean petrified the sharp blade and let the silver needles stab him. He was unharmed, and he didn't even feel pain. He had shot the 9-tailed fox's chest with a heat ray. At this moment, the hair on its chest was still broken, revealing the metal armor inside. Dean's eyes were gloomy, and the vertical pupil on his forehead split again. While dodging the silver needles, he suddenly took the time to shoot a light beam. Bang! The light beam hit the metal plate on his chest while the 9-tailed fox was moving. It looked like the 9-tailed fox had hit the metal plate on its own. Dean found that although this semi-biological mecha was strong, its combat experience was obviously not comparable to the Abyss inside the giant wall. Perhaps it could match the Abyss Lord in all aspects of performance data, but in the face of the real Abyss Lord, the difference in combat experience would make the battle one-sided. He didn't choose to fight head-on, lest his heart couldn't bear it. He felt as if his heart was broken. The main reason was that he had to deal with one of them as soon as possible. Whoosh! He petrified and dodged the nine-tailed fox's attack. From time to time, he found its flaws and shot a heat ray. The heat ray hit the metal plate on the nine-tailed fox's chest every time. If you look closely, you would find that it hit the same place every time. The nine-tailed fox mecha seemed to be aware of Dean's intention, and its attacks became more and more impatient. Suddenly, it roared to the sky, and the harsh sound waves came. Dean felt a burst of dizziness in his mind. He had a dreamy feeling, like he was drunk. At this moment, a feeling of horror suddenly came. Dean woke up from the intoxicated feeling, only to feel a lot of cold sweat all over his body. A laser expanded in his sight. He instinctively dodged to the side, but was still shot by the laser. With a whoosh, he felt his body become a little lighter. He looked around and found that the sharp blades protruding from his right shoulder had disappeared along with a fist-sized piece of his right shoulder, revealing the flesh and bones inside. Is it a spiritual magic mark ability? Dean's face changed slightly. The cells in his body surged, and the broken blades were reassembled again, but the bones and flesh in his shoulder couldn't heal themselves in a short time. He turned into the appearance of Splitter, like a fierce beast covered with sharp blades, rushing toward the nine-tailed fox. The nine-tailed fox swung its nine tails. The tips of the nine tails were extremely sharp, and impressively, they were made of metal, like 9 sharp blades. Dean suddenly sped up and escaped the attack of the nine-tailed fox, but the instantaneous acceleration exceeded the limit of his body. His heart felt like it was being torn again. He gritted his teeth and pounced on the chest of the nine-tailed fox. His tail blade smashed down and penetrated the metal plate. He saw a panicked woman in the cab. His eyes were full of tyranny, and several sharp blades shot madly from his body. Puff, puff, puff. The graceful woman's body was pierced with holes, and a lot of blood flowed out of the wounds. Her beautiful face was blurred by the blood, and she looked like a devil. Then flames leaped out of the wounds in her body, burning her body. Dean opened his mouth and inhaled. The flames attached to the cab were sucked into his mouth like air and disappeared. Dean removed the magic body and looked down at the beating heart in his chest. He saw that the heart, which was the size of a baby's fist, had expanded by half, and the color of the heart had become dazzling, like pure gold. However, the shape was a bit strange, and there were 4 lumps of flesh that looked like tumors on it. The heart still can't bear the full strength of the body. Dean slightly gritted his teeth. The 4 lumps of flesh that grew out of the heart made him inexplicably uneasy. He always felt that the formed heart would slowly integrate with the body and then completely become his heart and grow to the point where it could bear the full strength of his current body. However, the sudden appearance of the 4 lumps of flesh made him feel a sense of horror. After a few breaths of rest, Dean jumped down from the mecha, went to the tree, and took down Felix, who was hanging on the treetop in a very sorry state. Felix had witnessed the 2 strongest 4-star mechas in the factory being defeated by Dean, and he was terrified. Now, he could see that his previous estimation of Dean was completely wrong. This was clearly the existence of the Lord of the Abyss, not some lower abyss. Chapter 1081. According to Felix's understanding of the Demon Society, the Lord of the Abyss was a big shot in the demon race, second only to the 7 kings who ruled the demon race. Why would such a person take the risk of sneaking into the Federation alone? He couldn't figure it out, but he knew that this demon had a big secret. Don't kill me. I've already cooperated with you to escape. If you want to leave, I'll help you erase your identity and the clues you left behind. I won't put you on the wanted list. I swear. Felix hurriedly shouted when Dean brought him to the front of the mecha. "Didn't I say that the environment here is good? I don't want to leave for now." Dean indifferently said, "There's a communicator in the mecha. Immediately contact the people in the factory and tell them that you are safe. 2 mechas have rescued you. Ask them to send a chariot to pick you up." Felix's face changed. "You're going back. Why else would I come out?" "You?" Felix's face was pale. If Dean went back, he would be under the control of the demons all the time. He suddenly realized that Dean planned to sneak into the base again and take charge of this place from the dark. Is this the purpose of the demons? To sneak into the Federation and try to disintegrate us from the inside? Such a thought flashed in Felix's mind, but he didn't have time to think about it. Under Dean's gaze, he forced himself to convey Dean's words through the communicator in the mecha. The higher-ups on the other side of the communicator were all relieved and cheered when they heard that he was fine. "Are you going back with me?" Felix looked at Dean. He already had an answer in his heart. "Even if you cover your face, they'll still ask you when they see you." "How should I answer them?" Dean said indifferently. "There's no need to go through so much trouble." He came to the ghost shifter mecha and took off the jacket of the pilot inside. Then he ignited a flame in his hand and burned the body. After that, he put on the pilot's jacket and sat in the cockpit. At the same time, he pulled Felix to the co-pilot's cabin next to the cockpit. The co-pilot's cabin didn't have a connecting device and was mainly used to rescue companions on the battlefield. It wasn't big and could only accommodate 5 people at most. "You know how to operate a mecha?" Felix couldn't help but be astonished when he saw Dean's posture. He remembered that when Dean came to the factory, he was directly shut down. No one trained him, so how could he control the mecha? Dean responded to him in the next second. He pressed the login device on the cockpit, and several tentacles around him suddenly danced, wrapped around Dean, and then connected with his skin, penetrating into his body. In an instant, a lot of information seemed to pour into Dean's mind. It was about this mech, or to be precise, about this monster. Abilities, habits, tastes, a lot of information emerged. After 4 or 5 seconds, Dean's eyes showed a clear color. He felt that his body had become infinitely huge. His perception was magnified several times, extending to the surrounding world. He could feel the outside wind caressing his body. He could feel the fragile earth under his feet. This feeling was simply comfortable. It was his first time connecting with a demonic mech, and he didn't expect it to feel so good. He couldn't help but control the mech to jump on the spot. Whoosh! The mech suddenly bounced up, flew up to 100 meters in the air, and then fell back down. The earth trembled, but Dean felt that his body was full of unparalleled explosive power. He felt that he could easily destroy a city right now. Felix, who was sitting next to the co-pilot, looked at the demon incredulously. Even for a professionally trained mecha pilot, it would take more than 3 minutes of resonance connection to be able to control the mecha. In the process of resonance connection, the pilot also needed to familiarize and memorize the information fed back by the mecha. This huge amount of information was enough to make the average person's brain hurt. But Dean completed the resonance connection in just a few seconds. How strong was his brain? "We can go back now." Dean tilted his head and smiled. He was in a particularly good mood. The demonic mech not only gave him an extraordinary experience of power, but also made him very excited. If he was the one controlling the demonic mech, it should be very easy to kill the other lords of the Abyss. On the way back, he tried to activate the magic marks of the splitter in his body. The power of the magic marks surged out of his body. In the next moment, he felt that the power seemed to flow out of his body and into a larger container. Then he felt a 12-meter thick splitter blades growing out of the body of the mech. In addition to that, 2 huge blade wings protruded out of the back of the evil Buddha. The magic marks ability can extend to the demonic body without any hindrance. Dean was shocked. He suddenly sprinted forward. With a whoosh, the scenery around him moved as fast as lightning. He crossed thousands of meters in the blink of an eye. This speed was 2 or 3 times faster than before. Felix, who was in the co-pilot's seat, looked at the scenery outside and was shocked. He felt that this mech seemed to have broken the limit of their design. Suddenly, he thought of something and hurriedly said, "Not good. Your power is too strong. If you use the full power of the mech won't be able to bear it." Dean was startled. He suddenly felt that some of the joints outside the mech were slightly loose. It seemed that the mech was about to disintegrate. He quickly slowed down and put away the power of the magic mark. Most pilots use themselves as the energy to activate the power contained in the mech. Felix sat in the co-pilot seat and smiled slightly. "But the energy in your body is too strong, even stronger than our mech. Not only can you fully stimulate the potential of the mech, but you can also overload it. It seems that if I have a mech that can bear my power, I should be invincible, right?" Dean's eyes slightly lit up. Felix's mouth slightly twitched. He was silent. It didn't take long for them to see several chariots coming over. "Even if you're wearing his clothes, they'll still recognize you." Felix shook his head. Dean raised his hand and pressed on his face, adjusting the bones. Soon, his face was 70 to 80% similar to the previous Ghost Shift pilot. In the darkness of the night, if one didn't look carefully, they wouldn't be able to recognize each other. Felix couldn't help but gasp when he saw this. Finally, he smiled bitterly and didn't say anything. "We're here to pick up the president, Lucifer." The chariot stopped, and a middle-aged man with a righteous face called out. He was the previous head of the factory security. Felix glanced at him, the corner of his mouth slightly twitching. He let Dean bring up the external projection of the mech and said through the mech's loudspeaker, "No need. Lucifer will send me back. You can escort me from behind." Chapter 1082. President, that demon. The head of security asked cautiously. After all, he had to bear the main responsibility for Dean's escape. Felix glanced at Dean, indicating how to answer. Dean whispered a few words. Felix was startled for a moment. Then a wry smile appeared on his face. He said to the head of security, "The demon has escaped, and Xiaoling is chasing after him. I don't know how the situation is. Let's go back first, lest the demon comes back." The head of security was startled. He didn't expect Dean to be able to escape from the encirclement of two four-star mechas. Seeing that there was no protection around, he hurriedly said, "President, please return to the factory quickly. I'll bring up the rear." Felix was amused by his words of loyalty. He sighed and turned off the external projection. He turned to Dean and whispered, "I've done everything you told me. What do you want to do? You want a legal identity in the Federation. I can get it for you, and you won't be tracked down. I hope you can leave. Otherwise, sooner or later, you'll be exposed, and I won't be able to protect you." Dean smiled and said, "They'll send someone to check the battle later. You can call a few of your trusted men to investigate. I'll stay here for a while." Felix's face turned ugly. Every day Dean didn't leave meant that his life wasn't under his control. It wasn't a good feeling. On the way, Dean told Felix a few more things. Before long, they returned to the underground factory. They saw that several high-level executives were waiting at the door to greet them. Seeing Felix come out of the mecha, they were relieved and hurriedly came forward to ask about his well-being. They were very concerned. Felix exchanged a few words and asked Dean to follow him. In order to express his gratitude for Dean's rescue, he promoted Dean's position to the position of mecha manager. The original mecha manager was the woman who piloted the nine-tailed fox. Now that she was dead, her position was vacant. It was a matter of course that it fell to Dean. No one objected. Dean and Felix returned to the lowest office and closed the door. Felix, who was leading the way, bowed slightly. Dean, who was following behind him, went straight to the chair in the office and sat down. He looked around and said to Felix, who was a little reserved in front of him, "You're the president of the Lock Consortium's Haas Company in Copper Ship City. Tell me about the Lock Consortium and the Tesla Consortium. Also, give me a detailed map of the 100 cities of the Federation. Pay attention, don't play tricks." Felix looked at Dean, who was giving orders. He was a little indignant, but he obediently listened with a smile. In just one night, Dean learned a lot about the Federation from Felix. He had also designed a few small traps to test the authenticity of Felix's words. He had learned these things from Luke and the other two mecha pilots. He roughly believed most of what Felix said, but he still had some doubts. It would be great if I had the Dream Breeder's magic mark. Dean thought of Crimson Moon's ability and was a little envious. Unfortunately, the Dream Breeder was a 5-star legendary monster. Dean also asked about the various instruments in the factory. As he had learned before, many of the instruments here were of great help to him. After all, although there was no research on the undead here, Hosk made a semi-biological mecha and had a deep understanding of the monster's body. Therefore, the instruments here were top-notch biology-related research instruments, enough for him to understand his own situation. Dean waited for Felix to finish and asked him to vacate a separate factory. Then he selected some instruments and asked him to send someone to deliver them. It was already dawn. After a night of continuous fighting, Dean couldn't help but feel a little tired. Felix saw that Dean seemed to be in a good mood, so he asked in a low voice, "Mr. Dean, I really don't understand. You're so powerful. Why didn't you threaten me at the beginning? That way, you would have been spared from these sufferings." Sufferings? Dean smiled as he thought of some of the punishments. At the beginning, I came with the attitude of cooperating with you. Who knew that you would directly lock me up? I could only come up with this plan. Felix was startled. Really? Of course it's fake. Dean smiled. Felix's mouth twitched slightly. He held back his anger and asked patiently, "If not, why didn't Mr. Dean make a move at the beginning? At first, I didn't know who was the leader here." Dean laughed and said, "You sent a manager to receive me into the cage, and then you appeared. I didn't know if you were the highest-ranking behind-the-scenes commander here, so I could only stay inside and figure out the situation. Who knew that you were more simple than I thought?" "That's the reason?" Felix heard Dean's sarcasm and felt a little aggrieved. His heart was filled with regret. Unfortunately, he couldn't go back in time. If I had violently broken the cage at the beginning, I would have been able to scare you. But your defense isn't weak. In case you contacted the military and sent people to encircle me, my situation would be even more dangerous. Dean slowly said, "On the contrary, if I stayed inside, I would have time to observe you. You think that I'm the one trapped, but in fact, it's you who are trapped." Felix's pupils shrank. He felt a trace of coldness. He finally knew how insidious and cunning the demon in front of him was. He was by no means a bloodthirsty and brainless demon like his previous impression. "So, you know how to operate our Protoss mecha. Did you interrogate Luke and the others?" Felix had already thought of Dean's means and asked while clenching his teeth. Dean nodded. Felix slightly clenched his fists. He couldn't wait to tear Luke and the others apart. When Luke and the others came out, he had sent people to ask them what had happened inside. But their words had no weight at all. They had been forced to confess by Dean. This was a naked betrayal. For the time being, there's no need to report the escape of the demons. You will suppress this matter. Dean said to Felix, "I don't want the military to come to investigate us now and add to the trouble." Felix's heart sank. "In addition, I know that you have a way to pass information to the outside world. But you know the consequences. It won't be good for you. You will be the first to die." Dean stared at him. "You're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.